This woman was empress for only a single day. She successfully conceived the emperor's child. After a sweet wedding night, the emperor heartlessly asked for a divorce. This political marriage was the late emperor's wish. The emperor didn't want to spend a single moment with the woman who had secretly loved the emperor since childhood, though heartbroken, painfully agreed to the divorce. The abandoned empress was scorned by her own father. Betrayed and alone, she had no choice but to pack her belongings and go live in the countryside. However, not long after, the woman discovered she was pregnant. She was carrying the emperor's child. 6 years later, she quietly gave birth and lived a peaceful, happy life in the countryside with her child. However, today, the imperial knights stormed into the woman's village. Hearing the news, the former empress felt a chill run down her spine. Dropping the basket in her hands, she raced home. How had the imperial knights found her so quickly? She had hidden herself so well. The woman flung open the door, desperate to see if her precious son was still there. A handsome boy with dark hair and crimson eyes, he was the spitting image of the emperor. He rubbed his eyes sleepily and asked, "Mother, what's happening?" The boy's crimson pupils were the unmistakable mark of the royal bloodline. The woman bit her lip, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Although she knew she couldn't hide forever, she still hoped her son could live a simple, happy life. The knight's footsteps outside grew closer. Quickly pulling her child towards her, she took out a treasured bottle of eye drops and applied them to his eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Please," she prayed silently, "please let it be in time." Just as the blue eye drops settled into the boy's eyes, the imperial knights found them. The woman shielded her child, turning her back to the knights. From beneath his cold helmet, a knight's stern voice declared, "Lady Estelle, His Majesty the Emperor requests your presence." And so, the mother and son, who had lived in exile, were taken back to the imperial palace. After 6 years, the woman saw the imposing emperor once more. She had thought her feelings for him had long since faded, but upon seeing him again, her heart was captivated anew. Memories of the sweet moment she had shared with the emperor years ago flooded back. This was the man she had loved with all her heart. She could never forget him. In reality, the woman bowed respectfully, even subserviently, to the emperor. He strode towards her and asked, "Why did you keep running? Did you think I would kill you if I caught you?" The little boy, startled by the emperor's words, clutched his mother's leg and hid behind her. Sensing her son's fear, the woman crouched down and held him tightly, terrified that her precious boy might say something wrong. Only then did the emperor notice the small child beside the woman. He frowned. "It's a boy," he observed with surprise. The child reminded him, strangely, of his own childhood. "Who is that child?" he asked. Silence hung in the air. The woman, shielding her child, met the emperor's gaze. From the moment she knew she was pregnant, the one thing she feared was her child's existence becoming public and being used as a pawn in political games. That was why she had hidden him away, for as long as possible, preferably forever. The former empress had run away while pregnant, hiding from the emperor and living in the countryside for 6 years. Now, the emperor's child was 6 years old. Looking at the child before him, the emperor felt a strange sense of familiarity. The woman kept the child behind her and, lifting her head, declared firmly, "He's my nephew." The emperor's brow furrowed. He had never heard of his former wife having a nephew. This scenario had played out in the woman's mind 1,000 times. Smoothly, she continued her fabricated story. "He's my cousin's son, left behind after his death." The emperor's mind raced. His former wife's cousin had died 6 months ago in the Northern Civil War. He seemed to recall that the cousin had indeed had an illegitimate son with a maid. Still suspicious, he pressed further. "So, this child is the heir to your family's estate. He doesn't resemble your family. If anything, he looks..." Realizing he was about to say, "He looks a lot like me," the emperor abruptly stopped. The woman swallowed nervously. Bravely, she met the emperor's gaze. "Finish your sentence, Your Majesty." Before being brought to the palace, the woman had given the child eye drops to change his eye color. He was no longer afraid, for the blood of the royal family was unique. So, when the emperor saw the child's blue eyes, his worries would be dispelled. 6 years ago, upon learning of her pregnancy, the empress, Lady Estelle, had gone to visit her maternal grandfather in the East. With her grandfather's help, the child's identity was disguised. But this wasn't enough. There was a significant obstacle to concealing the child's true heritage: his naturally red eyes. Fortunately, in the eastern forest, Estelle encountered a young apothecary. The apothecary, sympathetic to her plight, developed a potion to change the boy's eye color. Now, in the present, Estelle squeezed her son's little finger. The quick-witted boy immediately understood his mother's signal and cried out, "Annie Estelle." Estelle knelt down nervously, patting the back of the little boy's head. The performance was flawless. They had rehearsed it countless times. To ensure her son would call her Auntie Estelle when necessary, the squeeze of his little finger was their cue to begin the charade. Estelle had done everything in her power to conceal his identity. She stood, awaiting the Emperor's judgment. Would she truly succeed this time? The former Empress, unexpectedly pregnant with the Emperor's child, had been on the run for 6 years. Now, dragged back to the imperial palace for questioning, she and her son enacted their carefully crafted play, claiming she was the boy's aunt. Deceived by Estelle's convincing performance, the Emperor tentatively accepted her story. He no longer suspected the little boy's true parentage. Sensing this, Estelle sought a way to separate the Emperor from her son, lest their ruse be discovered. She crouched down, coaxing her precious boy gently. "Theodore, be a good boy. Will you wait for me in the next room?" She sealed the request with a pinky promise. Tears welled in Theodore's azure eyes. He noticed his mother squeezing his little finger again and immediately forced a smile, replying obediently, "Okay, Auntie Estelle." With that, Theodore left under the guard's escort. Once Theodore was gone, only the Emperor and Estelle remained. She clenched her fists, trembling. The Emperor considerately poured his former wife a cup of hot tea. It's already early May, but the East is still quite cold. Seeing the tea he offered, the same tea she had favored during her time in the palace, a flicker of emotion stirred within Estelle. Could he still remember? The next moment, she dismissed the absurd thought. No, impossible. The Emperor abruptly shifted to the matter at hand. He had summoned her because of the Grand Empress Dowager, his grandmother. The Grand Empress Dowager had passed away, leaving the Emperor heartbroken. He had been raised by her. She had been the heir to the vast southern territories of the Myron Dukedom. Upon her death, those lands had reverted to the crown. However, the Grand Empress Dowager had left a peculiar will. It stipulated that no decisions regarding the southern territories could be made without the consent of the former Empress, Estelle. Thus, the Emperor had frantically searched for Estelle, all for the sake of the southern territories. The Emperor made a generous offer. "I want you to come with me to the capital. I will provide you with an estate and residence. Relinquish the southern territories to the crown." Estelle pondered for a moment, then refused. Fury ignited within the Emperor. He slammed his hand on the table and roared, "You understand the importance of those lands, don't you?" Estelle certainly did. The territories were key to the stability of the entire South. The nobles were watching like hawks, and the Emperor desperately wanted to avoid any complications. But she didn't want to relinquish the lands. She wanted to renegotiate the terms. The Emperor, suppressing his rage, demanded, "What are your conditions?" Estelle calmly stated, "First, reinstate my grandfather's pension. Second, once the matter of the will is settled, I expect you to immediately return me and my family." To the east, the former Empress, unexpectedly pregnant, had lived in the countryside with her child for 6 years. Now, the Emperor had brought her back, simply for his grandmother's will, to reclaim the vast southern territories from his former wife. Hearing that her demands weren't unreasonable, the Emperor breathed a sigh of relief. He rubbed his eyes, puzzled. Why? Wouldn't settling in the capital be more advantageous than a mere pension? Grandmother was very fond of you, Estelle. You were the one who wept the most when she passed. That's why she included such a stipulation in her will, the Emperor added, attempting to guilt her. Do you intend to disregard her final wishes? Estelle cut the Emperor short, interrupting his wild speculations. As the Empire's only duchess, and a former empress dethroned after a single day, returning to the capital would inevitably make her the subject of gossip. She'd had enough of that life. Now, she only wanted a peaceful life with her family. Estelle wasn't lying. The capital was dangerous. Living there might lead more people to suspect Theodore's true identity. Besides, her grandfather's retirement funds were more than enough for the three of them to live a quiet life for the rest of their days. Truthfully, she longed to reclaim the family lands seized by the emperor's predecessor, but asking for too much would inevitably cause trouble. This was enough. Estelle's heart pounded nervously in her chest. A bead of cold sweat trickled down her temple. She pressed her lips together, awaiting the emperor's answer. The narcissistic emperor, assuming she still resented him, sighed and stood. Fine, he conceded. I agree to your terms. However, I have one condition. Until this matter is settled, no matter what happens, you cannot run away again, Estelle. Looking at the man she had once loved so deeply, extending his hand to her with a gentle, gentlemanly gesture, Estelle felt a blush creep up her cheeks. But the responsibility of motherhood sobered her in an instant. With unwavering certainty, she replied, "It's a deal. I won't run away." Seeing his former wife clasp her hands together, refusing his offered hand, the emperor dejectedly lowered his own and clenched his fist. He wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. On the carriage ride to the capital, Theodore occasionally fell asleep in his mother's lap. Estelle studied the vial in her hand. She had sold all her belongings to fund the research for this color-changing potion. Despite countless experiments, she still hadn't solved the problem of its short duration. One application of these eye drops lasted half a day at most. It should be enough to last until she and Theodore reached the capital. Estelle gently stroked her precious son's hair, her face etched with worry. Before this bottle runs out, I must find a way to make more. Since befriending the apothecary, Estelle had learned a great deal about herbal remedies. But this particular potion was complex. The dethroned Empress, who had reigned for only a day, traveled to the capital with her child and the emperor. The party arrived at their midway point, the city of Myron. As soon as they disembarked from the carriage, Estelle spotted a familiar face, the captain of the guard. 6 years ago, this man had been a constant presence by the emperor's side, though back then he was just an unknown, low-ranking knight. The captain, touched by the former empress's plight, engaged her in conversation. They were in the midst of a pleasant exchange when the emperor, scowling, suddenly appeared. Enough chatting, he snapped. Let's go inside. He strode off, then glanced back at his former wife as he walked away. His odd behavior puzzled Estelle. They reached the palace in Myron. As they pushed open the grand doors, a young woman with golden hair rushed towards the emperor, weeping and crying out, "Your Majesty, you finally arrived." She flung herself into his arms, clinging to him possessively and pressing her hand against his chest. Once her dramatic display was over, she finally seemed to notice Estelle. Frowning, she asked in a saccharine voice, "And who is this?" A tense silence hung in the air. The emperor didn't introduce Estelle. Estelle, however, recognized the theatrical blonde. A small smile played on her lips as she spoke. "Why, it's Lady Marianne. I trust Marquis Chloe is in good health." Marianne was surprised that this plainly dressed woman knew her father. Estelle explained with poise, "We've actually met once before. When Lady Marianne first entered society, her father, Marquis Chloe, was still relatively unknown. Now, he was one of the emperor's key advisors." Theodore, clutching his mother's hand, was distracted by a man running towards them. The flamboyantly dressed man, with fiery red hair, introduced himself. "Lady Estelle, a pleasure to meet you. I am His Majesty's secretary, Bellion." The name Estelle was familiar to Marianne. Suddenly, it dawned on her that this woman was the former Empress, Estelle, who had been banished from the palace after only a day. Marianne, never one for tact, blurted out her realization. Such a remark caused Estelle's face to fall. Thankfully, Theodore stepped forward, diffusing his mother's embarrassment. The little boy smiled and greeted them in a sweet, childish voice. "Good day, Lord Marquis. Good day, Mississippi." Everyone's attention was drawn to the small child at the former Empress's side. They were puzzled by the boy's precocious behavior. Estelle covered her face, shyly explaining, "I'm so sorry. He's probably trying to practice the etiquette he learned from his grandfather." Bellion, the emperor's secretary and son of a marquis, was charmed by Theodore. Young Master Theodore is very polite indeed. Suddenly, the emperor disengaged himself from Lady Marianne's arm and stepped forward. Belian led the former empress and her son to their prearranged accommodations. Before leaving, the well-behaved Theodore even offered Marianne a cheerful farewell. Marianne, however, disdainfully turned her head, pretending not to hear. Unaware of her dislike, the innocent Theodore praised his mother to the emperor. "She's just like a princess, isn't she?" After the mother and son walked away with the secretary, Marianne tried to act coquettishly towards the emperor. To her surprise, the emperor glared at her with disgust and strode away without a word, leaving Marianne standing there alone, fuming. The former empress, who had unexpectedly conceived the emperor's child, was now pretending to be the child's aunt as they returned to the capital to deal with the Grand Empress Dowager's will. Belian, the emperor's secretary, led Estelle and Theodore to their rooms. Estelle was still worried about having angered Lady Marianne. Belian quickly explained, "You misunderstand. The Emperor and Lady Marianne are not in that kind of relationship." This news shocked Estelle. "Why not? Is it because Marianne is too young?" As she spoke, Belian opened a large door. "Miss Estelle, this is your room." As the door swung open, a massive crystal chandelier came into view. The walls were decorated in ornate gold, and 3 maids stood waiting, bowing respectfully in unison. These maids were arranged by Belian. The emperor would be staying for 2 days, allowing the former empress to rest comfortably. Theodore, who had never stayed in such a luxurious place before, gasped in astonishment. Estelle thanked Belian graciously. "Thank you for your kindness, but this seems too extravagant for us." Belian waved his hand dismissively. "It's nothing at all." Estelle was about to say something more when Belian, noticing her hesitant demeanor, offered a forced smile. "If you truly feel uncomfortable, perhaps you could grant me a small favor." Estelle readily agreed. They went to the garden for tea, while the playful Theodore chased butterflies nearby. Belian got straight to the point. He requested that Estelle keep the Grand Empress Dowager's will a secret until they reached the capital. Estelle inquired as to why. Crossing his legs, Belian explained, "The Grand Empress Dowager passed away 3 months ago, but the issue of succession for the southern territories remains unresolved. If this matter becomes public knowledge, the southern lord's loyalties might waver." At first, the astute Estelle thought his reasoning sounded plausible, but the more she listened, the more she felt something was amiss. This man actually believed the succession issue could incite rebellion. That was the most peaceful region in the empire. Or perhaps, in his eyes, she simply wasn't worthy of being the heir. Estelle keenly sensed Belian's underlying disdain. She was no naive fool. As the former empress and the empire's only duchess, Estelle boldly countered, "Are you telling me this simply because the will concerns me?" Belian hadn't expected such a direct challenge from this seemingly fragile woman. He was momentarily stunned into silence. Even after being forced into divorce, even the emperor's secretary looked down on her, his words laced with mockery. Estelle pressed him directly, asking if he was targeting her. Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Belian feigned ignorance. Estelle calmly analyzed the situation. Once the Grand Empress Dowager's will is made public, people will naturally turn their attention to me. If the public sympathizes with my plight, the emperor's image will inevitably suffer. Watching Belian's nervous expression, Estelle shifted her tone, adopting a demeanor of feigned vulnerability. "And in that case," she continued, "the one who benefits most would be my father." Belian was taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. 1,000 thoughts raced through Estelle's mind. She didn't want to be seen as a fool, but neither did she want to appear too clever. Trapped between these two extremes, she could only act as she had. Belian, the red-haired secretary, sighed and awkwardly scratched the back of his head, offering a sincere apology. He insisted that he'd only spoken as he had to avoid unnecessary commotion. Seeing Belian soften his stance, Estelle also yielded slightly. She, too, wanted no part in the poisonous whispers of the court. Once the will was dealt with, she would return to the east. With everything said that needed saying, Belian rose to leave. "If you need anything," he offered as a parting courtesy, "please don't hesitate to ask." The unpleasant conversation over, the secretary strode from the garden, his face dark. He had expected the deposed empress, relegated to obscurity for years, to be a quiet, unworldly woman. He hadn't anticipated such shrewdness. She was truly Layston's daughter. Stopping in his tracks, Belian reminded himself that, for the time being, he must maintain a semblance of politeness towards the former empress. Estelle watched him go, breathing a sigh of relief. Theodore, curious, explored the garden, his gaze flitting from one thing to the next. He spotted an unfamiliar little plant and reached out to pluck it. Fortunately, Estelle noticed just in time and rushed to stop her son. Catching Theodore's small hand, she cried, "Theodore, don't touch that plant." It was called Legene, she explained, and touching it caused a nasty rash. Obediently, Theodore nodded. "Okay," he chirped. "I'll be careful." Estelle stared at the offending weed, her heart still racing. This clearly wasn't a place the emperor frequented. The gardens were rather neglected. Theodore, sweet and innocent, looked up at his mother's worried face. "Mama," he asked in his childish voice, "was that the emperor?" Estelle blinked, momentarily confused. "That uncle," Theodore elaborated, "the grumpy one." The image of the emperor's scowling face flashed through Estelle's mind. Smiling, she ruffled her son's hair. "Yes, darling, that was His Majesty the Emperor." Unbeknownst to the emperor, his unexpected pregnancy with the former empress had resulted in a child who was now 6 years old. Young Theodore had a vague understanding that the grumpy uncle was the emperor. He didn't quite grasp what an emperor did, but he knew from his mother that he was the most important person in the country. Estelle reminded her son again, "Remember, you can't call me mama here." Theodore's cheerful expression crumpled. He shrank in on himself, asking in a small voice, "Not yet," Estelle explained patiently. "We have to keep pretending until we go home." "Can you do that?" Theodore nibbled on his finger, dejectedly murmuring, "Okay." He had been behaving much better than Estelle had anticipated during this time in the emperor's presence. He was still so young, and most situations could be diffused with food or playful distraction. Most importantly, no one would ever suspect that she, the deposed empress, carried the emperor's child. The emperor himself would be the last to suspect it. They had only been intimate once on their wedding night, and the emperor had taken precautions. He had always made sure to avoid any unplanned encounters, not wanting to burden Estelle. Or perhaps, Estelle thought, he simply didn't want a child with someone he didn't love. She slapped her cheeks lightly. Dwelling on the past was pointless. It wouldn't change anything. Mother and son reached their room. Estelle leaned down to Theodore. "I've asked the maids to prepare a bath for you. We'll bathe as soon as we get inside." Theodore nodded happily. Just as Estelle's hand touched the doorknob, she heard the maids gossiping inside. "Is she really the former empress?" one whispered. "I heard she is," another replied. "Then why is she back now, trying to seduce His Majesty?" A maid scoffed, as if she sneered. With her looks, a ripple of laughter followed. Even the servants looked down on her, the former empress. Estelle froze outside the door for a few seconds, her heart twisting painfully. Perceptive as ever, Theodore looked up at his mother, gauging her reaction. A moment later, Estelle pushed the door open and strode in. The maids, startled by the former empress's sudden appearance, clapped their hands over their mouths. Maintaining her composure, Estelle addressed the 3 maids. "I'd like to bathe my son now. Is the bath ready?" The maids exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to speak. Estelle repeated her question, her voice laced with impatience. Finally, one of the maids, a girl with short hair, stepped forward to attend to Theodore. The other 2 maids' hearts pounded in their chests. They assumed the former empress, Estelle, wouldn't pursue their gossiping any further. Perhaps the matter was just going to disappear. Estelle led Theodore, her son, into the bathroom, gently telling him to wait there for a moment. Closing the bathroom door, Estelle's demeanor transformed. The gentle facade vanished, replaced by an icy glare directed at the remaining maid. "Did you really think I would simply let this go?" she asked, her voice sharp. A former empress, even for a day, being gossiped about by her own servants? Having ensured Theodore was settled and waiting obediently in the bathroom, Estelle turned back to the gossiping maids, her anger palpable. "Go to the head maid immediately," she commanded. "Tell her everything you were just saying about me. Tell her I demand new servants." The maids' faces paled, and they began to stammer apologies. Estelle held up a hand, silencing them. "Don't raise your voices," she hissed. "I don't want my son witnessing this." Her tone was severe. "Now go. Tell the head maid everything. I will confirm your story with her, so don't even think about lying." Having dealt with the troublesome maids, Estelle rubbed her temples with a sigh. Theodore was probably getting impatient in the bathroom. She decided to go in and help him bathe. A knock at the door startled her. Assuming it was the maids returning to plead their case, she wearily called out, "Enter." To her surprise, it was the butler, beaming, followed by several maids carrying gift boxes. They filed into the room, their expressions cheerful. One by one, the exquisitely wrapped boxes were opened before Estelle, revealing a dazzling array of jewelry and finery. Luxurious gowns and vibrant colors spilled from other boxes. These were gifts from the emperor. Estelle stared at the overwhelming display, bewildered. "What is the meaning of this?" she asked, her first instinct to refuse. "Thank you for His Majesty's generosity, but I have no need for these." The butler hastened to explain. "These are not simply gifts, Your Grace. His Majesty requests your presence at tonight's banquet. These are for you to wear." Estelle glanced at the mountain of gift boxes, a wave of annoyance washing over her. Meeting him is awkward enough, she thought. Why would he invite me? She needed a plausible excuse to decline. After a moment's thought, a perfect reason came to mind. Meanwhile, Bellien, the Emperor's secretary, delivered a report. The Duke of Dalton had indeed begun to make his move. With the Emperor away from the capital, the Duke saw an opportunity to instigate a rebellion. The Emperor's eyes flashed dangerously as he read the intelligence. He would give a Duke enough rope to hang himself. Just then, the butler knocked, relaying a message from Estelle. "I am honored by His Majesty's invitation," the butler conveyed, "but I must attend to my son and cannot be away for long. I beg His Majesty's forgiveness for my inability to attend. And since I cannot attend," the message continued, "please accept the return of these gifts." The Emperor was stunned. He had been rejected by his former wife. Bellien, standing nearby, could hardly believe his ears. The Emperor had sent a woman gifts, gowns, and jewels. For 6 years, the Emperor had remained resolutely unattached, showing no interest in any woman. It took the Emperor a moment to process the rejection. The butler, sensing the tension, quickly interjected, "Her Grace must care for her son, Your Majesty. It is understandable that she would be hesitant to leave him with strangers." The Emperor saw a simple solution to the butler's explanation. "If she is concerned about her son," he declared, "then they can both attend." Meanwhile, Theodore, splashing in the bath, sneezed. A sudden premonition of unease washed over Estelle. The Emperor had unexpectedly invited Estelle to the banquet. Also present were Lady Marianne, who harbored romantic feelings for the Emperor and the scheming Bellien. Theodore sat quietly beside his mother, clutching his beloved teddy bear. When the food arrived, Estelle instructed her son to put the bear down. The obedient boy placed the teddy bear on the adjacent seat, instructing it to sit nicely. Estelle truly didn't want to be at this banquet, but she couldn't refuse the Emperor twice in a row. She had to endure it. Even now, Estelle couldn't understand why her seemingly unfeeling ex-husband had invited her. Lady Marianne, practically vibrating with excitement, fixated on the venison before her. The venison reminded her of the previous year's hunting competition, where she had been crowned the Autumn Queen. Theodore, curious, piped up, "Mama, what's an Autumn Queen?" The woman patiently explained. Every autumn, the capital hosts a hunting competition. At the very end, one unmarried lady is chosen from among all the participants and crowned the Autumn Queen. Marianne, observing the former Empress, Estelle, explaining the hunting competition to her nephew, Theodore, couldn't resist a barbed remark. "It seems your nephew isn't very familiar with the hunting competition," Bellien replied. "Indeed, as such events aren't held in the East." This gave Marianne the opening she'd been waiting for. With a sneer, she quipped, "How pitiful to have never witnessed such a grand celebration." Bellien, setting down his fork, glared at the woman across from him. The atmosphere grew thick with tension. The secretary stepped in to smooth things over, bringing up Estelle's past. The former Empress likely attended more hunting competitions in her youth than anyone here. Sweating nervously, he directed a strained smile towards Estelle. "Perhaps you have some amusing anecdotes to share?" A pang of bittersweet nostalgia struck Estelle at the mention of the hunting competitions. She replied evenly, "When I was 17, I attended a particularly grand one with His Majesty." Relieved to have successfully steered the conversation, the secretary eagerly picked up the thread. "I believe I've heard of that one. Wasn't the winner that year the then-crowned prince?" The Emperor, silent until now, hearing his former wife recall the event, leaned forward expectantly. Estelle had no particularly fond memories of that particular competition. "I mostly sat in the stands waiting for it to end. It was rather tedious, if I'm honest. The details are quite hazy now, so long ago." The Emperor's hand clenched in anger at her dismissive tone. 9 years ago, the then-crowned prince had promised Estelle he would capture the finest prize for her. Estelle, filled with anticipation, had sat under the scorching sun, waiting for the crown prince, who was diligently searching the forest for a suitable offering. He had spotted a deer with a coat of white gold fur, perfect, he thought, for Estelle. The crown prince drew his bow and felled the deer with a single shot. Just then, the loathsome Duke of Ralston appeared. He, too, shot an arrow into the deer's neck. Warm blood splattered across the crown prince, though he was ultimately declared the victor. The blood stained the garland meant for Estelle. One moment, the crown prince was affectionately asking Estelle to be his autumn queen. The next, disgusted by the blood on the garland and the thought of the repulsive Duke of Ralston, he wordlessly abandoned Estelle and stormed away. As they say, a moment of anger can lead to a lifetime of regret. Estelle's mention of the hunting competition from 9 years prior plunged the dinner into an icy silence. The secretary, desperately trying to thaw the frozen atmosphere, blurted out, "There are many bears in this region, quite dangerous, so hunting is forbidden." Internally, he cringed. "Why did I just say bears?" he lamented. Unexpectedly, Theodore's eyes lit up with excitement. "Are there pandas here?" he asked eagerly. The secretary breathed a sigh of relief. Bears were Theodore's favorite animal. He pleaded with his mother to go see them. Suddenly, a man who appeared to be a guard knocked and entered. He whispered something in the emperor's ear, causing his face to darken. The emperor abruptly followed the guard out. The door slammed shut. Marianne, no longer bothering with pretense, rose to leave. Before departing, she couldn't resist one last jab at Estelle. "Oh, and if you plan on bringing your child to these sorts of events again, please teach him some basic manners beforehand." Estelle calmly watched her performance. Marianne, however, continued her tirade. "Children without parents, no matter how well they're raised, will always be somewhat lacking." As a former empress who had survived the intricacies of court politics, Estelle understood that these words weren't directed at Theodore, but at her, a woman who had lost her own mother at a young age. Such tactics were far too crude. Estelle smiled sweetly. "Lady Marianne, I truly envy you. Your parents must be both kind and forgiving." The implication hung in the air. Your lack of manners stems from your parents' overindulgence. This unexpected, yet pointed retort left Marianne speechless and fuming. Estelle rose, adding another blow. "Besides, haven't you forgotten? His Majesty also lost his mother shortly after his birth. It's fortunate His Majesty isn't here right now." With that, Estelle led Theodore by the hand and left. Lady Marianne stood there alone, trembling with rage. She recalled her mother's warning. "You absolutely must win His Majesty's heart during this tour. Don't let him fall for some strange woman from the countryside." Lady Marianne, determined to achieve her goal by any means necessary, bit her nails and swore to herself, "I have to think of something. I can't let that woman continue to act so arrogantly." The emperor and his former wife, Estelle, met late at night at the detached palace. The misunderstanding between them remained unresolved. After the banquet, the emperor suddenly remembered his beloved teddy bear, left behind in the dining hall. He had completely forgotten about the toy. He gently coaxed his sleeping son. "I'll go get it now. Wait here for me, okay?" Watching his precious son fall asleep instantly, the emperor chuckled fondly. Deep in the night, Estelle's white gown billowed in the breeze. Holding a candle, she made her way towards the dining hall, following the route she remembered. As she walked, she vaguely noticed a familiar figure ahead. It was the emperor. He had been working late in his office, where he received intelligence from Count Edward, an undercover agent working for the Bureau of Investigation. "The spider has fallen into the fake web," he mused. The plan to eliminate the Duke of Ralston was proceeding smoothly. Hearing footsteps in the corridor, the emperor wondered who was wandering around. No one should be here at this hour. Estelle hid behind a pillar, intending to wait for the emperor to leave before emerging. This act made the emperor mistake her for a suspicious individual. He quietly approached and grabbed her wrist from behind the pillar, pulling her out. Estelle lost her balance and stumbled into the emperor's arms. Seeing his former wife's face, the emperor exclaimed in surprise, "Estelle, what are you doing here?" The former empress quickly stepped back and curtsied in apology. She haltingly explained that her nephew, Theodore, had left his toy in the banquet hall, and she had come to retrieve it. "Please rest assured," she added, "I didn't see anything, and I didn't hear anything." The emperor, seeing her distance, felt a surge of anger. "Are you so determined to avoid any association with me?" he demanded harshly. "Are you afraid I'll interrogate you like a servant. Estelle finally looked up and calmly explained that she was simply trying to maintain a basic level of propriety towards him. She tried to say more, but the emperor turned away, unwilling to listen. Seeing his petulant behavior, a pang of hurt struck Estelle. Could it be that he feels guilty towards me? She wondered. With this thought, Estelle spoke frankly. Your Majesty, if your concern for me throughout this journey has been deliberate, then I believe it's unnecessary. I have no feelings for you whatsoever. Hurt and resentment laced her voice. She turned and strode towards the banquet hall. As they passed each other, the emperor couldn't help but glance back at her retreating figure. He recalled the hunting competition 9 years ago. As he placed a garland upon his beloved's head, he noticed a stain of blood on the flowers. The misunderstanding that arose between them that day had become a knot they couldn't untie, a burden Estelle still carried in her heart. The former empress, having spent only one night at the detached palace with her son, discovered the next morning that her medicine chest had been opened. The chest contained only common remedies and licorice root. She wasn't worried about anyone seeing its contents. But a chilling thought struck her. What if the intruder wasn't looking to steal but to poison? With a snap, Estelle closed the chest and left, feigning nonchalance. The recent incessant rain at the detached palace was a safety concern, prompting the emperor to postpone their departure. They had originally planned to stay only a day or so. Theodore's eye drops would barely last until they reached the capital. This delay was troublesome. While having tea in the palace gardens, Estelle politely asked Bellien, the emperor's secretary, if he could send a letter to her grandfather. Bellien readily agreed, promising to send it out immediately after she gave it to him. However, when Estelle handed the letter to Bellien, he made an impertinent request. Might I first glance at the contents? Although Bellien claimed that all outgoing mail needed to be checked due to external circumstances, Estelle understood. The excuse sounded official, but it was clear they simply didn't trust her. Outside, thunder and lightning raged. Estelle's spirits sank. With a false smile, Bellien extended his hand. "If you don't mind, Lady Estelle," he said. Inwardly, Estelle cursed the red-capped secretary 1,000 times. Outwardly, she smiled sweetly as she handed him the letter. The secretary read the letter with a stony face. It contained nothing particularly noteworthy. Aside from informing him of recent events, it was simply a message to assure her safety. Clever Estelle, naturally, wouldn't write anything revealing. In the eyes of others, it was just an ordinary letter. But she was certain her grandfather would understand the hidden meaning. Dismissing the stiff and unreadable secretary, Estelle clasped her hands and bowed her head in prayer. For the safe return of my family to the east, I cannot afford any mistakes. Now, Estelle had another pressing matter to attend to, finding the culprit who had tampered with her medicine chest. Returning to her room, she summoned the captain of the guard to investigate with her. The 3 new maidservants denied any involvement. They swore vehemently that they would never dare touch their mistress's belongings. Estelle's eyes narrowed. Someone had definitely opened the chest, not once but twice. Before the new captain of the guard arrived, it had been confirmed. No one besides these 3 maids had entered Estelle's room today. Estelle was ready to expose the maid responsible for this transgression. However, the maids loudly defended themselves. None would confess. This morning, when Estelle had discovered her medicine chest had been disturbed, she had purposely left the drawer it was in slightly ajar. She was curious to see what the culprit would do, knowing she had discovered their meddling. Furthermore, when she had opened the chest, she had coated the latch with the sap of a poisonous plant, leguining. Leguining was an uncommon weed, the same one Theodore had nearly touched earlier. Human skin would break out in a rash upon contact with its sap. The latch on the medicine chest was small and delicate, requiring fingers to open it. Seeing the maid's stubborn refusal to admit guilt, Estelle's voice turned icy. "Before I lose my temper, show me your hands." One of the maids, trembling, extended a hand covered in a red rash. She fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. Between sobs, the maid revealed the mastermind behind the scheme, Lady Marianne. The ambitious Lady Marianne had merely used a maid to poison Estelle's medicine chest. Even after being exposed, Marianne vehemently denied any involvement. She insisted Estelle had bribed the maid to falsely accuse her. However, the captain of the guard revealed that Marianne's personal maid had confessed to giving Estelle's maid a sum of money. The former emperor sat impassively on his throne, watching the women bicker below. Marianne, teeth gritted, pointed at Estelle, playing the victim. So, why were you carrying a suspicious chest? She turned, tears streaming down her face, and cried to the emperor, Your Majesty, I did it all for your safety. Someone so close to you carrying a chest full of vials and herbs. There must be a conspiracy. The emperor gleaned the truth from Marianne's theatrics. So, you admit you had your maid search her belongings? He then frowned, his voice sharp. And when did the security of this city become your responsibility? Marianne tried to argue, but Estelle stepped forward. I have something to say. Addressing Marianne's earlier accusation, Estelle explained, Doesn't Lady Marianne have younger siblings at home? Children are prone to illness and injury. My nephew, Theodore, is only 6. He recently recovered from a severe cold. Isn't it perfectly normal for me to carry a medicine chest? The secretary questioned Estelle's explanation. We also found a large quantity of finely processed herbs in Lady Estelle's luggage. Unless one is an apothecary, it's unusual to carry so many herbs. We would appreciate an explanation for this, Lady Estelle. Facing the combined pressure from the sly secretary and Marianne, Estelle bit her lip and lowered her head. It seemed honesty was her best course of action. Silence fell over the hall. Under the weight of everyone's gaze, she blurted out, Because I'm poor. Since I severed ties with my family, I've been penniless, living with my grandfather. But not long after, someone unjustly withheld his pension. Since then, the 3 of us have been so destitute we couldn't even afford a permanent physician, let alone buying medicine. Sometimes we barely had enough to eat. So, if Theodore needs medicine, I have to prepare the herbs myself. The emperor, who had remained impassive, felt a pang of sympathy hearing of his former wife's hardship. Then, Estelle addressed the relentless Lady Marianne. And while the quantity of herbs might seem excessive, they are common ones for emergencies. Is my explanation sufficient? The red-haired secretary smiled, indicating he understood perfectly. Thank you for your answer. Marianne, burning with shame and fury, thought, Can everyone truly believe this woman's lies? Seizing the opportunity, Lady Marianne pressed her advantage. If it was just for my safety, checking my luggage, why was the medicine chest open twice? Was it perhaps to poison me? Unable to defend herself, Estelle could only weep as she knelt before the emperor, repeating over and over, Your Majesty, please believe me. The emperor, having grasped the situation, saw no need for further theatrics. He rose and declared, Take Lady Marianne to the West Prison. The West Prison was notoriously dilapidated. Upon hearing the sentence, Marianne felt her world crumble around her. Having dealt with the troublesome matter of imprisoning the woman who'd attempted to poison his former wife, the emperor turned to Estelle and offered a humble apology. Estelle, I am so sorry you had to endure this. Estelle, observing the emperor's fidgeting, felt no stirrings of emotion. She offered a small smile. It's all right. Compared to what I endured as crown princess, this is nothing. With a curtsy, she excused herself, leaving the emperor standing awkwardly alone. Outside, the rain poured. Since being named crown princess at the tender age of 10, Estelle had weathered countless schemes and plots. Compared to those dark days, today's incident was indeed trivial. Still, she had no desire to face such dangers again. As thunder rumbled in the distance, a dull ache began to throb in her head. Stopping in her tracks, she pressed a hand to her face. I'm so tired. Suddenly, she remembered it was time for Theodore's eye drops. She had to return before his eye color shifted. Just then, a tall figure approached, gripping her shoulder and blocking her path. Belian, the emperor's secretary, his face grim, issued a stern warning. Your former majesty, you would do well to be more careful. Seeing his hesitant expression, Estelle couldn't help but ask, What do you mean by that? Belian released his grip, struggling to speak. Your actions today, they were a deliberate affront to the Chloe family. While the elder daughter takes after her parents, he continued, the younger daughter is quite different. Their second daughter, the beautiful Miss Florine, is currently the most likely candidate for Empress. Miss Florine has only just come of age, and Marquis Chloe has gone to great lengths to secure her position as Empress. Estelle, well versed in the games of the nobility, thought, so she's only 20. She addressed Belian directly. Does Marquis Chloe intend for both his daughters to vie for the position of Empress? Belian hesitated before answering. Isn't that how it always is? Estelle lowered her head with a wry smile. the power struggles within the palace. Truly, nothing has changed. Understanding that Belian was testing her, she sought to reassure him. I have no intention of crossing paths with Miss Florine. Once the will is settled, I'll be returning to the east with my nephew. With that, she turned and left. Belian remained, puzzled by the former empress. Could she truly have no lingering desire for the throne? Then he reconsidered. Her father, Duke Reston, was a notoriously cunning and treacherous man. He couldn't let his guard down. Little Theodore, tears streaming down his face, clutched his damaged teddy bear as he searched the gardens for his mother. Estelle was having tea with Belian. He had been shadowing her relentlessly for the past few days. Seeing her precious son clutching his beloved Kelly, heartbroken and sobbing, Estelle felt her world tilt on its axis. She quickly instructed a maid to bring her needle and thread, reassuring Theodore, "It's all right, darling. I'll fix him right up." Belian, observing the scene, offered, "Perhaps the maids could handle such a small task." Estelle, her fingers deftly mending the bear, explained with a sigh, "This teddy is quite old. No one else knows how to repair him." In truth, the bear wasn't particularly old, but having been fashioned from old curtains, it was prone to damage. She thought to herself that she should have used better material if she'd known how much Theodore would cherish it. Belian, watching the little boy's distress, leaned down and offered words of comfort. "Don't worry, young master. Bears are very strong. A little scratch like this won't hurt him." Theodore's interest was immediately piqued. Belian had told him before about the bears in the nearby forest. He clearly knew a lot about bears. "Perhaps you could see them sometime," Belian suggested. At the prospect of seeing his beloved bears, Theodore, his face flushed with excitement, turned to his mother. "No, Mommy says it's not allowed. The forest is very dangerous this time of year." The next moment, Theodore wilted like a frostbitten flower. Belian, realizing his blunder, apologized profusely to the young boy. Innocent Theodore looked up, his youthful eyes fixed on the secretary. "It's okay," he said. Such an understanding child nearly melted Belian's heart. In the moment their eyes met, Belian saw the Emperor's shadow in the boy's face. Noticing Belian's strange expression, Estelle set down her teacup and suggested that Theodore go into town for a stroll. Theodore immediately brightened. He clasped his hands together and asked his mother, "Really? Can I go for a walk?" Estelle agreed readily this time. "As long as you stay with your lady-in-waiting." Theodore hugged his lady-in-waiting's leg. He longed to go out and play. Estelle had previously kept him inside for fear of him encountering the Emperor. Now, even if they did meet, it shouldn't be a big problem. On the other hand, this perceptive secretary, spending too much time with him could be more problematic. So, Estelle decided to let the lady-in-waiting take Theodore out for a while, making sure she brought him back before bath time in the evening. To change Theodore's eye color, she only needed to administer the medicine once before dinner. So it should be fine. Theodore left with his lady-in-waiting. Just as they left the gardens, they bumped into the Emperor, who was preparing to go hunting in the forest. The Emperor's heart softened at the sight of the little one. He asked the lady-in-waiting what he was doing here. The lady-in-waiting respectfully replied, "Miss Estelle instructed me to take him for a walk in town." Little Theodore, unafraid of the Emperor, hopped over like a bunny and asked curiously, "If you go to the forest, can you see real bears?" The Emperor, not skilled with children, paused for a few seconds before asking, "Do you want to see bears?" Theodore nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with anticipation. But the next second, he suddenly remembered his mother's words and dejectedly explained to the man before him, "But Annie won't let me." The Emperor crouched down, intrigued by this adorable little boy. Children of this age usually don't pay much attention to adult cues, often doing as they please. But this child seemed unusually well-behaved. The Emperor suddenly wondered, could it be because Estelle wasn't his real mother that he was so obedient? He recalled his own childhood, which he hadn't spent with his birth parents. As a child, the Emperor had often been bullied and would hide in a corner and cry silently. Suddenly, the lady-in-waiting's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Your Majesty," she said, "please forgive my interruption, but Miss Estelle said that the young master must be back before dinner." The Emperor felt conflicted. He both felt for the well-behaved boy before him and didn't want to go against his former wife's wishes. So he stood up, patted Theodore's head, and said consolingly, "Then there's nothing we can do. There will be other opportunities." Theodore didn't show any disappointment. Instead, he smiled at the Emperor and said, "Okay, Your Majesty. Have a safe trip." And so they walked in opposite directions. After a few steps, the emperor began to imagine Theodore's tearful, pitiful face because he couldn't see the bears in the forest. Thinking of this, the emperor sighed helplessly. Then he turned and strode back towards Theodore. "Wait a minute," he said. "I'll take you, but you can't tell your aunt." The emperor secretly took Theodore hunting in the forest. Would he recognize that the little boy before him was his own son? Meanwhile, Estelle sat in the garden, drinking tea, feeling uneasy. Belian also sensed the former empress's anxiety. He asked, "Why hasn't the young master returned yet?" Estelle also found it strange. She had specifically instructed the lady-in-waiting to bring Theodore back before bath time. At this rate, they might miss the medicine window. After pondering for a long time, Estelle, unable to shake her worry, stood up and excused herself to Belian. "I'm sorry, I must go and look for him." Seeing her worry, Belian naturally offered, "Then let me help you." Estelle had sent Theodore away precisely to minimize contact between him and the secretary. She felt a pang of hesitation. Could she really accept his help? What if he found Theodore first and saw the change in his eye color? But then she thought there was still time, so she graciously accepted. "Thank you, then." The two searched throughout the palace gardens, calling out Theodore's name. The butler, hearing the commotion, rushed over and asked what was the matter. Understanding that the former empress was looking for her nephew, the butler replied evasively, with a strange look in his eyes, "I haven't seen him." Estelle, a mother's instincts flaring, strode towards the butler. "He's been missing for hours. I specifically instructed the maid to bring him back before sunset. But now even the maid is nowhere to be found. If you know where they are, please tell me." The hapless butler, witnessing the former empress's mounting anxiety, wrestled with whether to reveal the truth. Just then, Belian, the emperor's secretary, poked his head in, demanding to know what the commotion was about. The butler, unable to maintain the charade any longer, adjusted his glasses and conceded, "Although His Majesty ordered secrecy, I'm afraid I must speak now. Young Master Theodore has been taken to the hunting lodge by His Majesty." The news struck Estelle like a thunderbolt. Her legs trembled, and she swayed precariously. Belian, too, was taken aback. "His Majesty took Theodore? What?" The butler explained everything. "His Majesty took the young master to the forest to see the bears. It looks like it's about to rain. I don't know when they'll be back." The emperor had taken Theodore to the hunting lodge without permission. After sunset, Theodore's eye drops would wear off. There was only an hour left. A clap of thunder echoed through the air, amplifying Estelle's fear. Struggling to maintain composure, she lowered her head slightly. "Belian, how long does it take to reach the hunting lodge from here?" Belian answered truthfully, "By horse, it would take an hour at the fastest." Hearing this, Estelle bit her lip. "If we leave immediately, will we make it in time?" Her body trembled uncontrollably. "Perhaps the eye drops will have worn off by the time we arrive." The situation was dire. Estelle had no time to deliberate. Turning calmly, she forced a smile and addressed Belian. "What should I do? As I mentioned before, Theodore recently recovered from a severe cold, so I've been giving him his medicine regularly." Feigning concern, Estelle continued, "A child's illness can easily relapse. With this weather, if he doesn't take his medicine on time, I'm truly worried he'll get sick again." She looked up at Belian with pleading eyes. "So, if it's not too much trouble, could I go and give him his medicine?" Belian was taken aback by the former empress's request. A storm was imminent, and she wanted to travel to the hunting lodge in the forest. While he understood her anxiety about being separated from her son, he felt she was overreacting. Skeptical of Estelle's explanation, Belian insisted on accompanying her. He couldn't allow His Majesty's guest to venture out alone in the pouring rain. As Belian instructed the butler to prepare a carriage for Estelle, she quickly interjected, "A carriage is too slow. If you don't mind, I prefer to ride horse. It's been a while since I've ridden in the forest." Estelle and Belian locked eyes, a silent exchange passing between them. After a moment, Belian conceded, "Very well, let's ride. I'm more comfortable on horseback anyway." In the midst of the raging storm, Estelle, cloaked in black, galloped through the forest with Belian close behind. The rain intensified. At the hunting lodge, the captain apologized to the emperor. "The horses are restless, Your Majesty. We cannot hunt, nor can we return to the palace." The emperor covered his mouth, guilt gnawing at him. "This is troublesome. Not only did I fail to show the boy the bears, but I can't return him before sunset either." Dismissing his men, the simple-minded emperor sat alone in his office, clutching his head in frustration. The list of things I need to apologize for keeps growing. The Emperor had brought Theodore to the hunting lodge, but the downpour prevented them from venturing into the forest to see the bears. Filled with remorse, he stroked Theodore's soft hair. "I'm sorry. It seems I can't keep my promise to show you the bears." Theodore, peering out the window, didn't seem disappointed at all. His radiant smile warmed the Emperor's heart. Suddenly, the Emperor remembered something. "Actually, there's a bear here at the lodge. Shall we go see it?" Theodore's face lit up, and he bounced excitedly behind the Emperor. However, when he finally saw the long-awaited bear, Theodore nearly burst into tears. The creature was enormous, 3 towers tall, with menacing claws and teeth. Theodore clutched his chest, seemingly petrified. Is that a real bear?" The Emperor replied matter-of-factly, "Indeed. Is this your first time seeing a real bear?" Theodore nodded, having always imagined bears as cuddly creatures. He hadn't realized how dangerous they could be. He reached out to touch the bear's fur, only to find it surprisingly cold. Innocent Theodore was curious. Why wasn't the bear moving? The Emperor, without a second thought, replied, "Of course it's not moving. It's dead." The word dead made Theodore's heart sink. His eyes widened, and he froze, stammering, "How did it die?" Looking into Theodore's bright eyes, the Emperor was momentarily speechless. He had received many honors for hunting that bear years ago. But now, facing this little boy, he couldn't bring himself to say it. He could only avoid the question and change the subject. He pulled out his grandfather's old hunting rifle and offered it to Theodore. "This is an old flintlock. The percussion cap has been removed. You can have it as a toy." But Theodore wasn't interested in the gun. He was still absorbed in the sorrow of the bear's death. The captain of the guard, who had been standing nearby, offered a suggestion. "Your Majesty, this lodge also has hunting dogs." The Emperor, as if grasping at a lifeline, asked, "That's right. Would you like to see the dogs?" Seeing a flicker of interest in Theodore's eyes, the Emperor immediately signaled to the captain with a look, "Bring the dogs to the study at once." A short while later, the captain of the guard led in a golden retriever. The retriever panted, its tongue lolling out, as if smiling at Theodore. Theodore tentatively reached out his hand. Unexpectedly, the golden retriever placed its paw in his palm. Such an obedient dog instantly melted Theodore's heart. The dog then licked his cheek. The boy and the dog, upon their first meeting, quickly became fast friends. The Emperor was pleased with the captain's arrangements. The captain had specifically chosen the gentlest and most obedient dog, ensuring no problems with the young boy. The Emperor, finally relieved of one worry, allowed Theodore to take the dog and play in the hallway. Watching the boy's happy retreating figure, the Emperor couldn't help but smile. Estelle was frantic. Theodore's eye drops would wear off in an hour. And at that moment, little Theodore was playing with the golden retriever at the hunting lodge. The Emperor instructed his servants to prepare some toys for the young boy to play with the dog. Theodore, holding a blue ball, played fetch with the golden retriever in the courtyard. No matter where Theodore threw the ball, the retriever always caught it and brought it back to him. The rain grew heavier. Theodore looked up at the dark sky. He suddenly remembered his mother's instructions to return before dinner. But the Emperor's status was paramount. His mother had also told him to obey the Emperor. Lost in thought, Theodore accidentally let the ball roll away. The golden retriever, without hesitation, dashed into the forest after the ball. Theodore followed, running into the trees. Meanwhile, Estelle and Bélien galloped through the pouring rain. Bélien, struggling to keep up with Estelle, worried about the former Empress's safety in the downpour. He repeatedly cautioned, "Your Majesty, riding so fast in this storm is dangerous. Please slow down." However, Estelle pretended not to hear, continuing at full speed towards the hunting lodge. This unusual behavior made Bélien suspicious. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Her attitude wasn't just that of a mother worried about her child, or rather, the whole situation had been strange from the beginning. No one had expected the Grand Empress Dowager to make such a will. And Miss Ju, completely unprepared, had managed to evade the royal search for 2 whole months. And ever since she appeared, Duke Leighton had also begun to act. The suspicious Bélien wondered, could all of this be planned? But if that were true, why did this strange young woman care so much about the child? He had to get to the bottom of it. His Majesty, usually so composed, always seemed to lose control when faced with these two. This made Bélien even more cautious. The horse in front suddenly stopped, interrupting his thoughts. Estelle finally paused for a brief rest. Having ridden so far in such heavy rain, Estelle felt dizzy. Bélien hurried forward, suggesting, "Perhaps we should rest a little longer." Estelle, her face pale, shook her head. "Let's rest at the lodge." Even though Estelle had ridden with all her might, the effects of the eye drops had already worn off. Theodore's disguise should have faded. Theodore and the golden retriever, both drenched, ran into the rain. The boy and the dog, soaked to the bone, stood before the emperor. The emperor, unsure of what had happened, looked at them. Little Theodore, head bowed, explained dejectedly, "The dog and we were running, and then we ended up outside." The emperor sighed, a hint of exasperation in the sound, but no real reprimand for Theodore. He simply instructed a servant to find some clothes the boy could wear. The servant hesitated, explaining that no children's clothes were kept at the hunting lodge, as previous emperors had never brought children there. Looking at poor little Theodore, he could only suggest drying the boy's clothes by the fire. Theodore, understanding, obediently sat beside the fireplace. The moment his bottom touched the rug, a large, damp patch appeared. The servant, flustered, immediately offered to take the young master somewhere else to change. The emperor shot him a look and told him to stop fussing and just bring a towel. Moments later, the emperor draped a soft white towel over Theodore's head and patiently began drying his hair. He didn't want the boy catching a chill. Theodore looked up at him with large, shining eyes. The emperor chuckled. "You're just like the puppy," he said, worried the dog might also catch cold. Theodore took the towel from his own head and began to dry the dog, a gesture of innocent kindness that captivated the emperor. He studied Theodore's profile, a nagging sense of familiarity tugging at him. It must be because he resembled Estelle, he concluded. The firelight cast flickering shadows, and Theodore's pupils, reflecting the flames, gradually shifted from blue to red. With a clang, the doors of the hunting lodge swung open. Belian, having tethered the horses, inquired after the emperor and Theodore. A servant led him inside. As they entered the main hall, a maid hurried forward to dry their clothes. Estelle, head bowed, her expression grim, felt her spirits sink. Half an hour had passed since the eye drops had worn off. Clutching her skirt, she felt a pang of regret. If only she could rewind time, just half an hour. Belian, ever attentive, escorted Estelle to the emperor's office. After a perfunctory knock, Belian pushed open the door. Seeing the emperor seated at his desk, Estelle squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself. The emperor, surprised to see his former wife with Belian, rose to his feet. Belian stepped aside. Estelle, who had clung to a sliver of hope, now saw the serious expression on the emperor's face. He seemed about to speak, then hesitated. She met his gaze, her heart a turmoil of conflicting emotions. Had he discovered her secret? Theodore's eye drops had indeed worn off. Estelle, consumed by anxiety, kept her gaze lowered, convinced her secret was out. She bit her lip, awaiting judgment. To her astonishment, the emperor draped his own cloak around her shoulders, his expression filled with concern, not anger or suspicion. He turned to Belian and asked what had happened. Belian began to explain that Estelle had been worried about her nephew's health. Estelle, taking advantage of the moment, glanced around the room and spotted her precious son asleep by the fireplace. Theodore, using the golden retriever as a pillow, slept soundly. The emperor explained to Estelle he and the dog got caught in the rain. He was dry his clothes by the fire and fell asleep. I turned the fire down a bit so he wouldn't get too hot. Studying the emperor's face, Estelle saw no sign of suspicion. Clutching the cloak around her, she asked tentatively, "May I take him back to my room to sleep?" The emperor readily agreed. "Of course. You should get warm yourself, too. You're shivering." Estelle realized she had been trembling since she entered the room, her nerves on edge. Trying to keep her voice steady, she said, "I'm fine. I'll take my leave then." With that, she lifted Theodore into her arms and left the office. Back in a room the servants had prepared for her, Estelle finally released a shaky breath. Theodore, stirred by the closing door, blinked his red eyes open and murmured, "Mama." Laying him gently on the bed, Estelle held him close, her voice thick with emotion. "It's me, my darling. Everything's all right. Everything will be all right." Judging by the emperor's reaction, Theodore must have fallen asleep before his pupils changed color. She had made it in time. Holding her son felt like holding a precious treasure she had almost lost. His true identity remained safe. She had braved the storm, ridden through the rain to the hunting lodge, all to administer those eye drops. The emperor hadn't suspected a thing. He was simply concerned about Theodore. Perhaps he truly believed the boy was seriously ill. The secretary, observing the emperor's troubled countenance, admitted his own confusion. He'd anticipated some deception, but the emperor's complete lack of suspicion was utterly uncharacteristic. Miss Estelle's panicked demeanor during her recent horseback ride, as if she'd forgotten something crucial, coupled with Belian's flimsy excuse for approaching the emperor, fueled the secretary's suspicions. Recalling Estelle's earlier exploitation of the poisonous herb's properties to expose the maid who'd poisoned the tea and her subsequent discovery of Miss Ju, the secretary grew increasingly convinced that Belian's actions were suspect. He resolved to investigate further. Just then, Estelle, her golden hair cascading around her shoulders, appeared, clad in a sleek black gown and high heels, a stark contrast to her usual simple attire. The former Empress radiated an almost dazzling aura. Both the emperor and his secretary stared, momentarily speechless. The secretary, startled, opened his mouth to speak, but Estelle quickly interjected, explaining that the gown was the only suitable attire she had found in the villa. She settled gracefully onto the sofa. The emperor, facing his former wife, stammered apologies. "I'm so sorry," he began. "I shouldn't have brought Theodore here without warning you. I didn't expect the rain to be so heavy." Estelle, however, offered a reassuring smile. "It's quite all right," she replied. "Theodore has been cooped up in the city. He must have been bored." The black, off-the-shoulder gown accentuated her porcelain skin and the elegant curve of her neck, making her appear strikingly beautiful. The emperor, momentarily captivated, inquired with concern, "I heard you came to give him medicine. Is he seriously ill?" Estelle, seizing the unexpected opportunity, feigned a delicate vulnerability. "He's not exactly ill," she explained, "but my grandfather always said the Kerbeck family sometimes has members born with weaker constitutions, like my mother." The emperor nodded sympathetically, recalling Estelle's mother's tragic death in childbirth. Suddenly, the door burst open. A guard rushed in, his voice urgent. "Your Majesty, Marquis Kerbeck has fallen ill. He's been bedridden for days, complaining of severe headaches and dizziness." Estelle gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "My grandfather," she whispered. "It's all my fault," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "He was already frail, and now he's suffering in a foreign land." The emperor and his secretary exchanged bewildered glances, completely unsuspecting, unseen by them. A glint of triumph flashed in Estelle's eyes. Perfect, she thought. Everything is going according to plan. To protect Theodore's true identity, Estelle had orchestrated this elaborate ruse, arranging for her grandfather to feign illness and inform the emperor. In reality, her grandfather was in excellent health for his age. A seasoned war hero, he possessed more vitality than Estelle herself. In her last letter, Estelle had subtly hinted at her concern for her grandfather's health, mentioning headaches. The astute old man had understood her meaning and played his part perfectly. Events were unfolding precisely as Estelle had envisioned. With feigned tears and a trembling voice, she implored the emperor, "Your Majesty, I beg you, allow me to take Theodore to Tanzburg." Her plan was simple. Under the guise of visiting her ailing grandfather, she would escape the emperor's watchful eye with Theodore. Once in Tanzburg, she would write to the emperor, claiming her grandfather's condition was worsening and requesting permission for Theodore to remain with him. The emperor, she reasoned, would have no need to detain a 6-year-old child and a frail old man. With a look of earnest pleading, Estelle continued, "I must care for my grandfather myself. Seeing Theodore will surely lift his spirits." The secretary, sensing a deception, felt a surge of frustration. He had barely begun his investigation, and now the cunning former empress was about to slip away. To his surprise, the emperor flatly refused. "No," he declared, "we shall all go together. If we travel quickly, we can reach Tanzburg in 3 or 4 days." Estelle, taken aback, stammered, "Your Majesty, there's no need to trouble yourself. Just arrange a carriage for us." "I'll take Theodore," she began, but the emperor cut her off firmly. "We will go together. I won't allow you and Theodore to travel alone." Estelle's carefully laid plans crumbled around her. Had the emperor extended his stay in Milan for a reason other than the rain? Estelle knew the emperor well enough to doubt such a simple explanation. She had assumed he had important matters to attend to. However, faced with the emperor's unwavering resolve, Estelle reluctantly abandoned her argument. He silently calculated in the carriage. It didn't matter. Once they arrived in Tanzburg, he could still send the child and his grandfather away. He just needed to hold on for 4 more days. Just 4 days ago, Estelle, the former empress, had miscalculated. She had originally planned to take the child back east first to visit his grandfather. Unexpectedly, the emperor insisted on going with them. As they were about to leave the hunting lodge, little Theodore clung to his golden retriever, reluctant to part. Estelle told her precious son to let the dog go. This was his home. However, both boy and dog were deeply attached, clinging to each other tearfully. Theodore's pitiful state stunned Estelle. The child was usually obedient and wouldn't be so stubborn. Just then, the emperor strode over, asking Estelle what was happening. Seeing Theodore clinging to the dog, the emperor understood immediately. He generously declared, "If you like this dog, you can take him with you. Consider it a gift from me." Theodore's face lit up instantly. The golden retriever, as if understanding the emperor's words, also seemed delighted. Only Estelle was hesitant. She wanted to decline the emperor's kindness. "Thank you for your kindness, but the child is still young. I'm worried he might hurt the dog. Then both he and the dog would be in danger." The emperor, observing the harmonious scene between Theodore and the dog, immediately refuted her. "From what I've observed, that shouldn't happen." He solemnly assured his former wife, "This child is very good with dogs, and this dog is well trained. There shouldn't be any danger." Estelle still wanted to refuse. The emperor sighed deeply. He lowered his head, his expression forlorn. "I just feel guilty towards you and the child. You can consider this a gift from me, as an apology. But if you truly feel uncomfortable, I'll try to persuade him." Estelle hadn't expected the emperor to express his feelings so openly. She had no reason to refuse any further. "Your Majesty, thank you for your kindness," she finally agreed. Now, both the emperor and Theodore were happy. The emperor bent down and instructed, "You must take good care of the dog. Don't worry your aunt, all right?" Theodore and the dog spun around joyfully. Watching their joyful interaction, Estelle stood to the side and reminded Theodore, "It's time to leave. Let's get in the carriage." Seeing Theodore's happiness brought joy to the emperor's heart as well. Inside the carriage, Estelle immediately closed the window with a snap. Little Theodore excitedly played with the dog. He had even given the dog a name, Belian, because the dog's fur was the color of pine needles, and in the Eastern tongue, Belian meant pine needle. Sitting in the enclosed carriage, Estelle finally relaxed. She had almost forgotten the most important thing. She was running out of eye drops. This trip east was taking longer than expected, and she hadn't had time to make more of the medicine in the last few days. She would have to find a way to make it at the next stop. Otherwise, Theodore's secret would be completely exposed. The emperor, along with his former wife and their entourage, traveled east to visit her grandfather. In the evening, they stopped at a village for the night. The location was remote and appeared quite dilapidated. After the rooms were assigned, Estelle led her son to their quarters. The room was not only covered in dust, but also littered with dead leaves. Even Estelle found the room excessively Spartan. However, she quickly consoled herself. This was a small village on the border. It was probably not very prosperous. Little Theodore didn't mind the shabbiness of the room at all. He leaned against the windowsill and exclaimed excitedly, "Mama, look, you can see the whole village from here." Estelle rushed over, cautioning her son to be careful not to fall. Just then, she noticed the dead branches outside the window. Looking out over the village, she saw that such dead trees were everywhere. Estelle's heart lurched. This village had an infectious disease, Initian typhus. It was a contagious disease prevalent in the northeastern part of the continent. She had heard that one of the most characteristic early symptoms of this typhus was the death of the Ishima plant. Estelle picked up one of the dead branches from the windowsill and examined it carefully. She was certain that this was indeed Ishinmu. Why would the emperor choose lodging in a place ravaged by such a contagious disease? Could it be that no one knew about the outbreak yet? Or was it, just as Estelle was lost in thought, a creaking sound broke her reverie? An elderly woman in an apron greeted Estelle with a warm smile. "Miss, hello. The bathwater is ready. Would you like to bathe now?" Estelle said not yet. She had intended to ask the old woman about the infectious disease, but seeing the old woman's hands, she immediately stopped and changed her mind, deciding to bathe first. Estelle, holding her son's hand and carrying towels, followed the old woman to the bathing area. The old woman apologized, explaining, This town is very old. The bathing area was rudimentary, furnished with only 2 simple wooden stalls. Next door was the changing room. After changing, Dale simply placed his discarded clothes in a nearby basket. Having explained everything, Dale slammed the changing room door shut. Towel in hand, his expression serious, he beckoned Theodore over with a crook of his finger. The matter concerned Theodore's change of clothes. Clutching his teddy bear, Theodore followed his mother's instructions and pushed open the door. Seeing the toy in Theodore's hand, the old woman immediately grew wary. Where did that toy come from? I didn't see it just now. She told Dale, who was about to bathe, that the teddy bear would surely get soaked if taken into the bathroom. It would be best to leave it in the basket. Dale's heart skipped a beat. Suppressing his anxiety, he told his precious son to give the teddy bear to his grandmother for safekeeping. Though unhappy, Theodore obediently complied. Once they were gone, the old woman immediately transformed, pressing and probing the teddy bear's body, searching for hidden objects. Finding nothing, she rummaged through the clothes basket. Still nothing. The medicine in the medicine box seemed ordinary as well. Defeated, the woman reported to the man outside the door, "I've thoroughly checked as you instructed. I haven't found anything unusual." The man scoffed dismissively and told the old woman to leave. He had been told that he would be handsomely rewarded if he found anything strange, but it had all been a waste of effort. He had even specifically sought out the village's only apothecary, disguising her as a maid to inspect Estelle's room. On her way back, the apothecary felt a pang of unease. There were indeed some unusual herbs in the medicine box, but none of them seemed poisonous, so it should be fine. The quick-witted Dale retrieved eye drops from the seam of his collar. He had nearly been exposed. The moment he got close to the old woman, Dale sensed something was amiss. She smelled of herbs, and there were green stains on her fingers. All of this proved she wasn't a maid from the city, but someone who handled herbs daily. If she was the apothecary, the mystery of the infectious disease was solved. Pinitha's typhoid was deadly, but curable with consistent medication. Although the village was backward, the presence of an apothecary meant widespread outbreaks were rare. The only person who would plant an apothecary near him at this juncture was the suspicious and power-hungry secretary. Dale was shocked by the secretary's blatant move. Clenching his fist, he silently encouraged himself. He absolutely couldn't let his guard down. Little Angel Theodore was playing with a rubber ducky in the bath. Dale held the eye drops and gently coaxed Theodore. "Let's put in your medicine while you're bathing, all right?" Theodore readily agreed, tilting his head back for his mother to apply the drops. His son's obedience filled Dale with a sense of comfort. Sitting in the tub, Theodore blinked his innocent wide eyes and asked, "Mama, if I don't use the medicine, will my eyes turn red?" Dale continued bathing him while answering, "Yes, but you mustn't tell anyone about this, okay?" All this time, Theodore hadn't understood why his mother insisted on this. He finally voiced his long-held confusion. "Why not? Are red eyes bad?" Theodore looked pitiful, gripping the side of the tub, his face etched with a Wei Chu, a mix of grievance and sadness. "The Emperor's eyes are red too. Why can't mine be?" His innocent words sent Dale's heart plummeting. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Theodore had never asked such a question before, his thoughts simple, always obeying his mother. He couldn't believe a few meetings with the Emperor could have such an impact. Theodore hung his head dejectedly, water droplets trailing down his wet hair. Sensing his mother's distress, he asked in a small voice, "Should I not have asked that?" Theodore had finally voiced the question that had been troubling him. Stunned, Dale gazed tenderly at her precious son and devised a plausible excuse. "Theodore, do you remember the story I told you about the farmer and the mage?" Theodore, of course, remembered. In the story, the farmer found a magical jewel, but it was so precious that it would disappear if anyone else knew about it. He reached out and gently stroked Theodore's cheek. "That's right. The things that are truly precious, we must keep hidden. Your eyes are the same, Theodore." Theodore instantly understood, the cloud of gloom lifting from his face, replaced by a bright smile. Splashing in the bath, he asked his mother, "But it's okay for His Majesty, right?" Dale nodded firmly. "Of course. His Majesty is both powerful and holds the highest position. But we, like the farmer in the fairy tale, are just ordinary people, so we must keep precious things hidden." Dale smiled, her gaze fixed on her son. "You must never let anyone know about your eyes. Understand?" Theodore raised his arms joyfully, promising his mother he would tell no one. Mother and son embraced in the warm water. Dale couldn't resist kissing her son's cheek. My precious boy. Despite her reassuring words, Dale's heart was heavy with worry. One day, she would have to tell Theodore the truth. But now was not the time. She would wait until he was older, until he could understand her predicament, and then she would tell him everything. Back in reality, Dale stood at the nearby sink, reaching for the soap. Theodore was still engrossed in playing with his rubber duck. As Dale extended her arm, revealing her pale skin, she suddenly noticed a rash of red spots spreading across her wrist. Could this be? While Theodore and his mother bathed, the emperor discussed the village's contagious illness with his revered captain. The village they were meant to pass through had suffered an outbreak of a virulent contagious disease called Neshon typhus. It seemed they would have to take a detour. The detour would add 4 days to their journey. Though reluctant, the emperor saw no other option. He was deeply concerned about the afflicted villagers. Are they receiving effective treatment? He asked. The revered captain regretfully informed him that they were not. Due to a shortage of medicine, the only course of action had been to quarantine the village. The emperor gritted his teeth at this news. Simply locking them away without providing treatment, he ordered the captain to immediately dispatch soldiers to assist and allocate emergency funds. If necessary, doctors and apothecaries were to be brought in from neighboring regions. He clenched his fists, suppressing his anger. The more he tried to set things right, the more corruption he uncovered. For the past 10 years, no one had truly governed this nation. The emperor before last had cared only for power and territorial expansion, and the previous emperor had been nothing more than a puppet of Duke Leighton and the Grand Vizier. The current emperor had long resolved to make a change, to find a way to govern this nation properly. He would not allow this outrageous situation to become the norm. After speaking with the emperor, he went to Dale's door and knocked softly. The door creaked open. Freshly bathed, Dale stood in a pure white nightgown, her golden hair still damp with droplets of water. She gasped, recognizing the visitor. "Your Majesty." Dale took a step back, apologizing. "I'm so sorry, I was startled." The emperor coughed, equally embarrassed, and asked Dale what was the matter. Her next words struck him like a thunderbolt. "Your Majesty, I think I have typhus." Upon hearing this, the emperor grasped Dale's arm. "Is it serious? I'll call a doctor immediately." Overcome with anxiety, the emperor's hands began to tremble. He had changed nothing, not even noticing the illness of someone so close to him. Dale, surprised by the emperor's intense reaction, called out to him, bringing him back to his senses. "Calm yourself. I don't have Neshon typhus." It turned out Dale had contracted only a common strain of typhus. Neshon typhus manifested with black spots, while red spots were a sign of a common fever. So there's no need to worry. With some medicine and a few days rest, I'll be fine. The emperor instructed his secretary to have the city doctor come to the countryside to attend to the patients. He also ordered that Dale's room be changed to a more suitable one in the main building for her recovery. Before he could finish, Dale interrupted him. "I don't want to change rooms, and I don't need treatment." Dale's next words were even more difficult for the emperor to accept. While acting as Theodore's caretaker, Dale had unexpectedly contracted typhus during their journey. The emperor hastily ordered his secretary to summon the city doctor to the countryside and to prepare more spacious accommodations for Dale. However, Dale immediately refused the emperor's offer. She not only declined to change rooms, but insisted on treating herself. The village doctor and the revered captain were both stunned. Even if it were just common typhus, without treatment, it would undoubtedly worsen. The emperor, seated opposite Dale, his expression troubled, pondered for a long moment before finally asking with difficulty, "Why would you make such a decision?" Dale had already prepared a counter-strategy. She knew that a contagious disease, the dreaded Neshon typhus, had broken out near the village. Times of political unrest, like these, were breeding grounds for rumors. If word got out that someone in the emperor's entourage had contracted typhus, it would only further destabilize the political climate. And if rumors spread that someone infected with the disease had stayed in this village, the village itself would suffer the consequences. Silence fell over the room after Dale spoke. She optimistically reassured everyone that there was no need to worry about her. She had concocted remedies for typhus many times before. All she needed was the emperor's permission to leave and gather the necessary herbs. In truth, contracting typhus was actually a blessing in disguise for Dale. It gave her a legitimate reason to leave and search for the herbs needed to make eye drops for Theodore. The old woman, the apothecary, chimed in, agreeing with Dale. However, as a precaution, she suggested that Theodore should be moved to another room. Dale smoothed the hair by Theodore's ear and gently reminded him, "My sweet boy Theodore, did you hear? You'll have to sleep separately from Mommy tonight. Is that all right?" Theodore, who had been playing with his dog, readily accepted this. "Then I'll sleep in a new room with Bryn," he told his mother. The Emperor, now without grounds for refusal, prepared to leave. "Very well, then do as you suggest." Pleased that her plan was working, Dale turned to thank the Emperor. But as she did, her gaze met the secretary's complex, scrutinizing stare. The secretary, who had been suspicious of Dale all along, pointedly remarked that he had just happened to meet an apothecary. If she needed any herbs, she could get them from the apothecary. The revered captain seemed unaware of any apothecary having been there. Dale wondered if the secretary had guessed her true intentions. Maintaining a cheerful facade, she replied that she planned to search for the herbs herself tomorrow morning. The Emperor readily agreed, but, not wanting Dale to go alone, offered her a guide. Dale, her eyes fixed on the secretary, calmly requested, "Lord Bellion, would you be my guide?" The quick-witted Dale, with the suspicious secretary in tow, set out for the fields. She walked ahead, carrying a wicker basket. The secretary followed cautiously behind. The housekeeper had told Dale that the Lord's hunting grounds and the herb garden were located just beyond the city gates. Any herbs not found in the garden were kept by the apothecary and could be obtained by informing the housekeeper. After a long journey early that morning, they finally reached the herb garden. Seeing that they were alone, Dale turned and asked directly, "So, Lord Bellion, is there something you'd like to say to me?" The secretary feigned ignorance with a smile. Dale pressed further. "If you continue to play dumb, I'll have no choice but to tell His Majesty about someone searching my room." The secretary's face darkened at her words. Looking at the now serious Empress, he scratched his head and let out a nervous laugh. "You're very clever." He admitted to the search and, though belatedly, apologized to Dale. He offered an excuse, claiming he was worried Dale might be hiding the young master's illness, as she had done at the villa previously, and that was why he resorted to such measures. With a deep, 90-degree bow, the secretary apologized again for his recklessness. Dale didn't accept his apology. Holding her basket, she asked, "After this charade, you have no more doubts, do you?" The secretary lowered his head. "Of course not. I would never dare to offend you again, my lady." Dale smiled, a warning in her eyes. "Since you understand that it was an offense, may I ask for compensation?" The question hit the secretary like a bolt of lightning, leaving him speechless and sweating. He stammered, What kind of compensation would you like?" The conversation had reached its intended effect. Dale's smile widened, radiant. "Unfortunately, I don't need anything from you at the moment. I'll let you know when I do." The secretary finally understood the true depth of Dale's cunning. This woman always sought to find his weaknesses, to exploit them when necessary. And he had no choice but to agree. After all, he was the one who had offended her. Having said her piece, Dale had nothing more to say to him. She handed him the hoe from her basket. "Help me find some herbs, won't you?" The wealthy young man, unaccustomed to manual labor, trembled as he took the hoe, his voice shaky as he accepted the task. Dale searched the herb garden, a mixture of frustration and determination etched on her face. With the secretary distracted, she had a precious window of opportunity to find the herbs she desperately needed. As Dale moved towards the far side of the garden, she was startled to find the Emperor standing behind her. "He's so awkward," she thought, making up excuses to give his ex-wife flowers. Dale, searching for ingredients for Theodore's eye drops, turned and found the Emperor holding a bouquet of white flowers. With a carefully neutral expression, he explained, "The forest is dangerous. I came to help." This explanation drew a silent question mark in Dale's mind. "It's only a few minutes' walk back to the city from here," she thought. The Emperor, his face impassive, added, "It's dangerous for you to be alone." "Lord Bellion, the secretary, is here too," Dale blurted out. The Emperor's voice held a hint of annoyance. "Do you think he'd be of any help in a dangerous situation?" Dale lowered her head, considering. "He's right. Bellion would be useless," she admitted to herself. But the Emperor's presence complicated things. She couldn't focus on finding the herbs for Theodore. Just as Dale was trying to figure out how to subtly dismiss him, the Emperor offered her the flowers. "These are for you. I asked the physician which herbs are best for treating typhus. I found these flowers on the way here. They match the physician's description, he explained. Dale stared at the white bouquet, forcing a grateful expression. Thank you, Your Majesty. But these are just ordinary flowers, not medicinal herbs. Seeing the Emperor's cluelessness, Dale wondered if he was genuinely trying to help. Maybe I can get him to search for the herbs like the secretary, and that will keep him occupied, she mused. Dale carefully described the herbs she needed. Listening intently, the Emperor declared confidently that he would find them for her. The rustling of leaves filled the air as the Emperor and Dale split up, each searching for the specific herbs. The well-meaning but inept Emperor consistently picked the wrong plants. The herbs Dale sought were subtle, requiring a discerning eye. The Emperor's competitive spirit kicked in, and he redoubled his efforts, still without success. Just then, the secretary popped his head out from between the rows of plants. Unlike the empty-handed Emperor, the secretary held a large bundle of herbs. Seeing the Emperor squatting on the ground, radiating a palpable aura of frustration, the secretary froze, not daring to speak. He dropped the herbs and fled. The Emperor and his former wife found themselves in a rare moment of solitude. As they talked amidst the fragrant herbs, the Emperor asked Dale when she had learned about herbal remedies. Gathering her skirts, Dale continued her search while explaining, "An apothecary lived near my grandfather's house. I learned a little from her by chance, but I never formally studied as I needed to work to support my family." The Emperor, squatting nearby, sighed. "That's a pity." Dale turned, surprised. "Oh." A note of admiration colored the Emperor's voice. "If you had the opportunity to study formally, you would be a remarkable apothecary. You've always been capable of anything." Dale responded without thinking, "That's not true." A gentle breeze rustled through the garden, stirring her golden hair. The Emperor stared, transfixed, the scene evoking a memory from long ago. 8 years earlier, when he was still the crown prince, he had chosen Dale's family's hunting grounds for his 18th birthday celebration. It had been snowing heavily. Riding ahead of the crown prince, Dale had told him a local legend. "They say a spirit lives in the lotus pond at the heart of this forest. If you make a wish to it, your wish for love will be granted," she continued. The crown prince, unimpressed, had scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Surely no one believes such stories." To his surprise, Dale, her high ponytail swaying, had taken the story seriously. "It's such an interesting story. So, what happened to the young man?" she had asked eagerly. Seeing her interest, the guide had continued the tale. The young Dale, captivated by the story, had laughed delightedly. Meanwhile, the crown prince had been captivated by her beautiful profile. After the guide had left, the crown prince had shown off his skills in the hunting grounds. With a swift draw of his bow, he had shot a hare running through the snow. The heavy snowfall obscured his vision. Mistaking a snow-covered lake for solid ground, he had ridden his horse onto the thin ice. With a splash, both horse and rider plunged through the thin ice. Dale reacted instantly, leaping from her own horse and scrambling to pull the Emperor from the frigid water. But her footing was precarious. The ice cracked again beneath her, and she plummeted into the dark, icy depths. 8 years ago, on the Emperor's birthday, the former Empress Dale had fallen into the same lake, sacrificing herself to save him from a similar fate. When the Emperor finally managed to pull Dale from the water, she was unconscious. He carried her back to the lodge, where the doctor diagnosed her with a severe case of typhus. The Emperor's servants whispered amongst themselves, "On such a cold day, why would Lady Hasdell go to the lake alone?" It was all because of that guide. Captivated by his stories, Dale had insisted on venturing to the heart of the forest to the Qin mausoleum. The Emperor clenched his fists, his face a mask of fury. Just then, Dale stirred in her unconsciousness, coughing painfully. It was growing late, and urged by his attendants, the Emperor reluctantly returned to the palace, unable to stay by Dale's side. Before leaving, he gently stroked Dale's sweat-dampened cheek. "Hasdell," he murmured, "I'll come see you tomorrow." The next day, the Emperor canceled his hunting trip and went directly to the lodge to visit Dale. Dale, having just awakened and received the news, anxiously questioned her maid. "Why are you only telling me now? His Majesty is coming. Help me prepare." But the maid protested, reminding Dale that she was still unwell and shouldn't be getting up to dress. With the Emperor's arrival imminent, Dale despaired at the thought of him seeing her disheveled and unkempt. "I can't let His Majesty see me like this." Overcome with anxiety, she was seized by a fit of coughing, clutching her chest and weeping. The Emperor, standing at the doorway, witnessed this scene and, mistaking her distress for a rejection, turned and left abruptly. Yesterday's hunt was interrupted. He instructed his attendants. "We'll continue today." His attendants were confused. "But your majesty, you said you wouldn't hunt today." Bitterness twisting in his gut, the emperor simply replied, "I've changed my mind." A breeze stirred Dale's golden hair, pulling the emperor from his reverie. He removed his coat and draped it over his former wife's shoulders. Dale started to protest, but the emperor cut her off. "Keep it on. You're still ill." Their eyes met, and Dale offered her sincere thanks. "Thank you for your concern, your majesty." As Dale rose to leave, the emperor caught her wrist, his voice filled with excitement. "Hasdel, I found the herbs." He presented her with the small white flowers he'd picked. Dale examined them closely. They were indeed the herbs she sought. Lord Bellion, the secretary, also returned with a plentiful harvest. It was getting late, and the emperor suggested they all return to the village. Dale carefully wrapped the precious herb the emperor had found. "Yes," she agreed. "Let's go back." After returning to the village with their bounty of herbs, Dale stepped into her room and stopped short. It was completely different from when she had left that morning. Everything had been changed. The maid standing behind her explained, "His Majesty ordered us to redecorate your bedroom." Dale stared at the gleaming, opulent room, letting out a sigh. "Redecorate? It's a completely different room." Just then, Theodore came running in. "Mother, my room is different too." Theodore's room was now overflowing with toys. Even Brun, the golden retriever, had a new bed. The dog rolled around happily in his new plush nest. Theodore threw his arms up in the air, cheering. "I love my new bedroom." Dale asked the maid to watch Theodore for a moment. She needed to step out. Finally alone, Dale prepared the herbs, carefully brewing them and making a supply of eye drops. She drank a bowl of typhus-treating broth, a bitter taste lingering on her tongue. All the medicines were ready. Relief washed over her. As evening fell, Dale returned to her room to find Theodore sleeping soundly in the emperor's arms, clutching a stuffed toy. Brun lay quietly at the emperor's feet. Dale approached cautiously. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" The emperor had come to invite Dale to dinner. Finding her absent, he'd amuse himself by playing with Theodore. The child had drifted off to sleep in his arms. Gazing down at Theodore, nestled against him, sleeping soundly, Dale began with an apology. "I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. I hope he wasn't too much trouble." She offered to take Theodore to the next room. The emperor waved it away. "Not at all. I enjoyed playing with him." Suddenly, Theodore murmured in his sleep, and the small teddy bear Dale held slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. The atmosphere in the room thickened. Silently, Dale took her son from the emperor's arms. The emperor's expression was complex. Did he just call for his mother? In the former empress's arms, the sleeping Theodore dreamt and murmured, "Mama." The emperor flinched at the word. Dale quickly offered an explanation. "He sometimes calls out for his parents like that. No matter how young he is, he must understand what parents mean." The emperor's voice was soft. Dale's words had struck a chord. He suddenly felt a pang of pity for Theodore. It's good he has you, his aunt, to care for him. To never know your parents, that's a truly sad thing. The emperor left, the door clicking shut behind him. Dale, like a deflated balloon, finally relaxed. She stroked the head of her Brinblin plushie. "It's all right," she whispered. "Everything will be all right." The next morning, Dale woke her sleeping son. They were leaving the city today, but before they left, she needed to make him a fresh batch of eye drops. After many twists and turns, they finally arrived at her grandfather's estate. At the same time, Lady Marianne, imprisoned in the tower on the emperor's orders, also arrived there. Theodore, having not seen his great-grandfather in many days, ran to the bedside and hugged the elderly man, calling out sweetly, "Great-grandpa." Great-grandfather and great-grandson enjoyed a heartwarming reunion, clinging to each other for a long while. Dale dismissed the maids. She would care for her grandfather herself. Once they were alone, Dale apologized to her grandfather. "I'm so sorry we're late. Have you suffered much?" Her grandfather assured her that he had been well cared for. "It's just that Chiron keeps saying I'm ill, which is quite distressing." Dale recounted everything that had happened on their journey. After listening to his granddaughter's ordeal, her grandfather patted her hand. "You've been through so much." Dale managed a weak smile. "It's over now, thankfully." She planned to stay with him for a few days, then escort him and Theodore back east. She would then accompany the emperor to the capital. No matter what happened, Dale was determined to return her son to his rightful place. To achieve this, she needed the emperor's consent. The former empress, Dale, and her precious son had finally been reunited with her grandfather. Dale's plan was halfway to success. Just then, her grandfather remembered someone who had been waiting for Dale's return. Meanwhile, the red-haired secretary, Lord Bellion, reported to the emperor, "I've heard that Duke Leyston has begun quietly transferring funds." The emperor paused his writing. "Is that so? It seems the big fish has taken the bait." He was ready to close the net. Speaking of which, it's time we inspected the security in the north. The emperor instructed the secretary to inform Sir Lambert, the knight commander, to take a detachment of the knights to the north. This decision surprised the secretary. The Lambert Knights were the capital's most elite force. For those plotting rebellion, the Knights' departure would seem like a golden opportunity. But it was a trap. The secretary understood. "Yes, Your Majesty. I will also inform them that they need only remain near the capital." This would ensure Duke Leyston would brand himself a traitor. The secretary felt a flicker of worry for Dale's future. According to imperial law, all relatives of traitors were subject to execution. The emperor's pen stilled over his documents. A gilded invitation to a ball had caught his eye. The Minister of Management had arranged a welcome banquet for the emperor, including a ball. The emperor was uninterested. "Cancel this pointless event," he ordered coldly. The red-haired secretary had anticipated this response. Then, an image of Theodore, adorably attempting to dance, flashed through the emperor's mind. He wondered what Theodore would look like dressed in formal attire, twirling to the music. At this thought, the emperor immediately changed his mind. A ball didn't seem so bad after all. Yes, the ball would proceed as planned. The emperor, who had never shown any interest in balls, for the sake of seeing Theodore dance, uncharacteristically instructed his secretary, Lord Bellion, to reinstate the event. "Reinstate the ball," he commanded. The red-haired secretary was bewildered. "Your Majesty, haven't you always detested balls? Lady Dale often held balls during her time as Empress. I wonder if she still enjoys them." Suddenly, a knock echoed through the room. A guard reported to the emperor, "Miss Florine requests an audience, Your Majesty." Hearing the name, the emperor frowned. "Who did you say?" The guard nervously explained. "She seems to have just arrived. She insists on seeing you, Your Majesty. Miss Florine has traveled a great distance. It must be about her sister, Lady Marianne." The emperor sighed and instructed the guard to admit her. The doors creaked open, and the noble and beautiful Miss Florine entered, bringing with her a wave of perfume. Poised and elegant, she was a stark contrast to her sister. This belle of society, the second daughter of the Minister of State, was also the most likely candidate for the next empress. However, today, Miss Florine's complexion was poor. She bowed her head respectfully to the emperor. "Greetings, Your Imperial Majesty. I beg your forgiveness for this unannounced visit. I have come to deliver a message from my father." Stroking his chin, the emperor wondered what the Marquis could have to say. Miss Florine took a deep breath. "My father expresses his deepest apologies for failing to raise his daughter properly. He implores Your Majesty to punish my sister severely." The implication was clear. The Marquis had abandoned his daughter. He likely didn't want to jeopardize his newly acquired favor with the emperor. It seemed the Marquis was no different from the other nobles. Just as the emperor raised his hand to give the order, Miss Florine seized the opportunity to interrupt him. "However, Your Majesty, I disagree with my father's sentiment." The kind-hearted Florine hoped the emperor would reconsider his judgment of her sister. She had devised a plan during her journey. Rising to her feet, Florine presented her proposal. The emperor listened, incredulous. Dale, the former empress, finally met with her grandfather. Another old friend was waiting for her there. Seeing Hannah, her former personal maid, Dale was both surprised and delighted. Hannah had been Dale's dedicated servant, and the two had grown up together. However, after leaving the imperial palace 6 years ago, Dale had lost contact with her. Since then, Hannah had been tirelessly searching for news of Dale, but to no avail. Dale's grandfather had kept her hidden. Reunited after so many years, Hannah's eyes welled with tears. She had simply wanted to see Dale again, so upon hearing she was here, she had rushed over immediately. Just then, Theodore, tugging at Hannah's skirt, asked, "Aunt, who is she?" At first, Dale accepted Hannah's assumed identity without a second thought. But then, Dale suddenly realized that Hannah had known the emperor as a child. This could be a problem. To Dale's relief, Hannah seemed completely oblivious, smiling warmly at Theodore. She had heard about the little boy, believing him to be Dale's cousin's son. Hannah helped Theodore unpack his belongings and introduced herself. The two interacted easily. Seeing this, Dale finally relaxed. It seemed she had been worrying for nothing. That afternoon, they enjoyed tea in the courtyard. Hannah, hearing that Dale planned to return to the east after settling matters of inheritance, felt a pang of disappointment. Hannah had been working in the imperial palace all these years. She had assumed that Dale's return to the capital meant she would stay. Upon hearing the news, Hannah confessed her desire to accompany Dale. "Since being separated from you, miss, 6 years ago, I've deeply regretted it. You're not just my mistress, but my only friend. Spending these past 6 years alone in the palace has been incredibly lonely." She pleaded with Dale, "Please, don't leave me behind again." Hearing this, Dale recalled her own preoccupation at the time and how she hadn't considered Hannah's situation. As the former Empress's personal maid, Hannah's life in the palace must have been difficult. Dale nervously rubbed her fingers together. "Are you truly willing to come with me?" Hannah firmly affirmed her decision. Dale no longer hesitated. "Thank you. I'll be relying on you then." Reassured, Hannah beamed, clasping her hands gratefully. "Thank you, Mississippi. Thank you." Hannah's return was a blessing for Dale. She had planned to hire another maid after receiving her grandfather's pension, and Hannah's reliability made her the perfect candidate. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Lord Bellion, the red-haired secretary, stopped beside Dale. "Might I have a word with you?" he asked. Dale, unsure of what was happening, simply nodded. With a serious expression, the secretary began, "It concerns Lady Marianne." At last, the former Empress Dale had been reunited with her grandfather. However, Lady Marianne, who had previously framed her, had also been brought to the estate. Miss Florine, Marianne's sister and the most likely candidate for the next Empress, had personally come to plead with the Emperor. "I implore your Majesty to grant my sister a chance to apologize to the wronged Lady Dale," she pleaded. She believed that since her sister had committed a grave error, she should apologize to the person she had harmed. After the apology, the Emperor could then decide on the appropriate punishment. Initially, the Emperor was displeased with this proposal, but Miss Florine lowered her noble head and whispered, "I beg you." The ever-alert Lord Bellion observed this. Realizing the rumors were true, the younger sister was indeed more astute than the elder. After considerable thought, the Emperor devised a compromise. "As you suggest, shouldn't the wrong party's opinion be considered regarding your sister's opportunity?" He instructed the secretary to inquire about Dale's feelings on the matter. As Lord Bellion turned to leave, the Emperor added, addressing Miss Florine, "Furthermore, even if Lady Dale refuses, I hope you will not harbor any resentment towards her." After hearing the secretary's explanation, Dale contemplated her response. She certainly didn't want to accept Marianne's apology, but she also saw no need to continue antagonizing someone who might become the Empress. After a moment, Dale agreed to meet with Lady Marianne. Imprisoned, Marianne was a shadow of her former self, clad in tattered clothes, her eyes dull and lifeless. Dale was taken aback by Marianne's wretched appearance. While she knew Marianne was guilty, she hadn't expected her to be treated so harshly. Marianne bit her lip and grudgingly muttered, "I'm sorry." Immediately after, she bristled with anger, snapping at Dale. "Is that enough? Are you satisfied?" Sir Lambert, the knight commander, started to reprimand Marianne for her insolence, but Dale stopped him. She addressed the prisoner directly. "Lady Marianne, aren't you here to seek an opportunity for redemption?" Marianne retorted defensively. "Only the Emperor can decide my fate." She turned her face away, adding with a hint of shame, I just feel that what I did was wrong." Dale, hearing the woman's flippant tone, felt compelled to remind her of the gravity of her actions. "You knowingly tried to frame me for poisoning the Emperor. If your plan had succeeded, my family and I would be dead." Marianne hastily explained that she hadn't wanted Dale dead, only to teach her a lesson. Dale knew this simple-minded woman hadn't considered the severe consequences of her actions, and it made her seem even more pathetic. Dale, unwilling to prolong the encounter, made it clear she was only giving Marianne this chance out of respect for Miss Florine. If she continued with this attitude, she would be wasting her sister's efforts. "Do you have anything else to say, Marianne?" Dale asked finally. In the end, the stubborn Marianne offered no genuine apology. Even under duress, she refused to truly apologize to Dale. As Sir Lambert escorted the unrepentant Marianne back to her cell, she struggled violently, spitting curses. "You're nothing but a deposed Empress." Suddenly, the door burst open, revealing the Emperor, who had been eavesdropping. "Take this mad woman away," he commanded the guards. As Marianne passed the emperor, his cold gaze seemed to condemn her to oblivion. After she was gone, Dale sat down on the sofa, relieved. Lady Marianne is still young, Your Majesty. Please don't be too harsh on her. The emperor was silent for a moment before replying. It's because you're too soft. Dale, taken aback, wondered aloud. Am I truly that soft? She walked over to the emperor and asked, Did you come here because you were worried I would be lenient with Lady Marianne? The emperor admitted that wasn't the only reason. When Dale pressed him further, the usually composed emperor blushed, confessing he had come to see her grandfather. Dale was speechless. The two of them made their way to her grandfather's room, one after the other. With one problem resolved and another arising, Dale felt a wave of unease wash over her. When Dale's grandfather saw the emperor, his face fell. The emperor stepped forward, bowed, and apologized. Though a little late, he still wanted to offer his apologies to Dale's grandfather for the trouble his personal matters had caused. Dale's grandfather exchanged a few strained pleasantries, the polite yet distant tone evident in every word. Dale stood by, watching the emperor's gentle and refreshing demeanor with a sense of bewilderment. It had been a while since she'd seen this side of him. She had almost believed that his previous displays of tenderness were merely a facade, a way to present himself as a loving fiancé. Suddenly, the emperor asked about Theodore. Why wasn't he here? Dale explained that he was likely in his room, playing with his puppy. The emperor, fond of Theodore, praised the child's obedience and good manners in front of her grandfather. Unaware of the complicated situation, the emperor remarked, I imagine he takes after his father. The comment hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of Dale's past and her pregnancy. Dale's grandfather retorted curtly, Theodore has certainly inherited the best qualities of our family. Otherwise, he'd be an ill-mannered, uncivilized brat. The father the emperor referred to as Dale's cousin, while the our family her grandfather spoke of meant Dale herself. His implication was clear. It was a good thing Theodore didn't take after the emperor. The former empress's grandfather was subtly mocking the emperor. It was fortunate, he implied, that Theodore didn't resemble his father, which was why he was so well behaved. However, the emperor completely misinterpreted the remark, assuming it was a dig at the maid who had borne Dale's cousin's child. This comical misunderstanding left both Dale and her grandfather utterly perplexed. Her grandfather, barely containing his amusement, remarked with feigned surprise, I never knew you cared about the parentage of children. I wasn't aware you were so sentimental. He thought to himself, after the way he treated my granddaughter, he's suddenly concerned about someone else's maid? The emperor, equally oblivious, retorted, Of course I care. Someone cruelly separated the child from its mother, causing undue hardship for everyone involved. Dale's grandfather, realizing the emperor was indirectly blaming him, nearly leaped out of bed to protest. Your Majesty, are you suggesting I made my own granddaughter suffer? The two men locked eyes, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Dale quickly stepped in to defuse the situation. Wanting no further argument, Dale's grandfather scoffed and gestured for the emperor to mind his own business. But the emperor, still lost in his misinterpretation, remarked, It seems I had too high hopes for a former hero. Dale, exasperated, hissed at the emperor to stop. Ignoring her, he turned and magnanimously offered Dale a residence and lands in the capital, urging her and Theodore to stay. He further promised to provide servants and a nanny, assuring her it would be beneficial for both of them. Dale was speechless. The emperor's constant habit of making decisions for her, disrupting her plans, finally pushed her over the edge. Unleashing her pent-up frustration, she exclaimed, Your Majesty, I do not want to live in the capital. Please just stop. Go back. Just then, Theodore burst into the room. Seeing his mother's outburst directed at the emperor, he hesitantly called out, Papa. Theodore shuffled nervously into the room. Moments before, Theodore had been on the verge of tears, frightened by the tense atmosphere. Dale's heart melted, and she rushed to embrace her son. As if struck by a sudden thought, the emperor said, Oh, right. There's going to be a ball held here soon. The sight of the adorable Theodore had reminded him of the upcoming welcome ball in the city. He awkwardly invited Dale to attend. Though slightly taken aback, she agreed. The mention of a ball instantly erased Theodore's earlier fear. He jumped up and down, excitedly declaring that he wanted to go too. He had read about balls and fairy tales, places where people danced in beautiful clothes. Before he could get too carried away, Dale scooped him up. "You're too young for a ball, sweetheart," she said. Just as the Emperor was about to say that Theodore's age was perfectly acceptable, Dale shook her head vigorously, silently urging him to reconsider. The Emperor swallowed his words and, placing a hand on his forehead, reluctantly agreed, "No, you can't go." However, unable to resist Theodore's pleading gaze, he added, "But if you really want to go to a ball, I can arrange a special one just for you." Theodore, nestled in his mother's arms, continued to plead, but Dale remained unmoved. Then, Theodore mentioned his desire to visit the courtyard. He had tried to enter earlier, but a maid had stopped him, saying he needed the Emperor's permission. The Emperor agreed with a smile, granting Theodore permission to visit whenever he wished. He then promptly invited Dale, suggesting a stroll through the gardens. Dale glanced at her grandfather, who nodded his consent. With her son in her arms, Dale followed the Emperor outside. The weather was glorious, the foliage lush, and the river flowed crystal clear. Little green frogs perched on lily pads. The vibrant scene delighted Theodore, who, while playing with the tiny amphibians, noticed a curious white structure in the center of the courtyard. He turned to his mother to ask what it was, but the Emperor, walking behind them, answered first. "That gazebo was originally built for admiring the lotus blossoms," he explained. "Now it serves as a small exhibition hall. Perhaps Theodore would like to take a look inside." However, upon reaching the gazebo, they found the door locked. It seemed the caretaker was out, so they would have to postpone their visit. Peering through the windows, Theodore gasped. He could see many unusual vessels displayed within. "What are those?" he asked. Dale patiently explained. "Those are decorative pieces, Theodore, placed there for people to admire. They are precious and mustn't be touched." Leaving the gazebo, they continued their walk, arriving at a field of flowers. Theodore, awestruck by the sight, let out a cry of wonder as white petals danced on the breeze. Crouching down, Dale promised her son, "When we get home, I'll build you a flower bed just like this in our garden. And not only that, we can even build a small pond and keep fish in it." Thrilled, Theodore rushed into his mother's arms for a hug. The Emperor, observing the scene, offered to send Dale some flowers if she liked them so much. "All the way from here to the east?" Dale asked, a slight smile playing on her lips. The Emperor fell silent for a moment. Straightening up, Dale graciously declined. "If I need anything, I'll let you know, Your Majesty." The Emperor seemed momentarily taken aback. Then he nodded in agreement. Dale, however, had a plan forming in her mind. Such a moment would come soon enough. The upcoming ball would be the perfect opportunity. There, in front of everyone, she would ask the Emperor to return Theodore to the east. The Emperor, mistaking her words, believed that Dale's willingness to ask for help signified a thaw in their strained relationship. But Dale's thoughts were focused on the ball, where she planned to publicly request Theodore's return to the east. Back from the gardens, Dale and her grandfather enjoyed afternoon tea. She was curious about her grandfather's strange words to the Emperor. "Wouldn't that lead to misunderstandings?" she asked. Her grandfather took a sip of coffee, unconcerned. "He'll just think I'm an old fuddy-duddy. Let him think what he wants." Seeing Dale's skeptical look, her grandfather dropped his casual tone. Frowning, he emphasized, "Don't you think it's better for him to misunderstand? It will make it easier for me to drive away Theodore's mother." Dale paused, considering his words. He was right. She sat back in her chair, lost in thought. Her grandfather smiled reassuringly. "For you and Theodore," he said, "I don't care what humiliation I have to endure." She recalled Theodore as a helpless infant and how he had grown into the lively little boy he was now. Her grandfather had been by her side through all the challenging years of raising him. He was getting old now. Both his children and his grandson were gone. Now, only Dale and Theodore remained. Hearing this, Dale quickly added, "You still have Coco, grandfather." Dale's brother, the most loyal son of Duke Layton, had never contacted their grandfather. The Duke forbade it. She remembered how her brother had urged her to apologize to their father after her divorce and escape. Seeing Dale's somber expression, her grandfather quickly changed the subject. "So, why did the Emperor come to see me?" he asked. "He doesn't seem like the type to be so courteous." Dale was startled by the question. "He probably didn't have any particular reason," she replied without thinking. "He's actually a good person despite." Her grandfather scoffed. He'd spent his life despising the Emperor And now Dale was defending him? He's not. Dale insisted, flustered. She stirred her coffee, feeling awkward. Still, she was grateful to the Emperor for this opportunity. Surely, with so many people present at the ball, he wouldn't be able to refuse her request. Her grandfather, sensing her anxiety, asked, "Are you really all right with this?" Dale's hand, stirring her coffee, suddenly stilled. Over the years, he'd endured countless hardships. This current setback was nothing. So, he replied with a smile, "Of course, it's no problem." Dale's grandfather stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. More than feeling down, he was ashamed that he couldn't be of more help. But after arriving here and meeting the Emperor, he'd realized something. Theodore and the Emperor looked so much alike. How could others not see it? The fact that Theodore's true identity remained undiscovered was baffling to Dale's grandfather. They looked far too similar. If Dale's father were to see Theodore, he would likely uncover the secret. Duke Leighton was cunning and deceitful, and he'd frequented the palace since the Emperor was very young. Before her grandfather could finish, Dale interrupted him. "You don't have to worry. I would never take Theodore to the capital." Meanwhile, in a dungeon cell, Marianne, still in her ball gown, shattered the dinner plate brought by her sister. She roared furiously at her sister. "What are you doing? You came to mock me? Why are you subjecting me to this humiliation again?" Miss Florentine calmly explained that she had secured a chance for her sister to redeem herself, but Marianne had squandered it. Marianne continued to rant. She refused to beg that woman. Miss Florentine's gaze turned icy. She inwardly scorned her foolish sister. How could she be so incompetent and yet so stubborn? Seeing her sister's unyielding obstinance, Miss Florentine decided to say no more. "I'll think of something else. You just stay put," she said, and swept away. Always thoughtful, she instructed a servant to prepare some palatable food for her sister. She'd already spoken to the dungeon guards. "And have them clear away the broken glass," she added. The servant bowed in agreement. After Miss Florentine left, Marian gnawed at her fingernails, seething with resentment. She believed her sister was afraid of losing the position of Empress and was therefore deliberately withholding help. Marian bit her finger until it bled. No, she wouldn't allow that to happen. Just as a servant unlocked the dungeon door to clean up the shattered glass, Marianne, in a fit of madness, snatched up a shard and pressed it against the servant's throat. "If you don't do exactly as I say," she hissed. The next morning, the Emperor awoke to a commotion. He peered out and saw the living room piled high with gifts of all shapes and sizes. Later, Dale asked a servant about the presents. The servant happily explained, "These are gifts from His Majesty. He wishes you to choose some that you like to wear to the ball." Dale was astonished by the Emperor's efficiency. He'd managed to arrange all of this in a single day. Innocent Theodore, gazing around, was dazzled by the mountain of gifts. He asked his mother loudly, "Mama, does His Majesty like you?" Theodore had observed the Emperor's attentiveness towards his mother and the lavish gifts. Finally, he voiced his question, "Mama, does His Majesty like you?" Dale was taken aback. She immediately crouched down and asked gently, "Theodore, why would you ask that?" Theodore felt certain he was right. "Doesn't His Majesty give presents to the woman he likes?" Dale placed her hands on Theodore's shoulders and corrected him seriously. "Of course not. His Majesty sent these because I don't have a suitable dress for the ball." She warned Theodore that talking about who liked whom could cause trouble for others. Theodore, feeling chastised, lowered his head, looking dejected. Dale told Theodore to go play in the courtyard with Bryn for a while. She needed to prepare for the ball. After Hannah, the maid, led Theodore away, Dale finally breathed a sigh of relief. Dale's grandfather, who had overheard the conversation about the gifts, quickly turned away, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. Dale rested her chin in her hand, lost in thought. She didn't want to cause any further misunderstandings. But why did the Emperor always do things that were so easily misinterpreted? A few days later, Dale was trying on the dresses the Emperor had sent. Little Theodore, holding Bryn's hand, asked his mother if he could go play in the courtyard. Dale, dressed in a lavender floral gown, waved him off. She instructed one of the maids to keep a close eye on him and not let him wander too far. Theodore, hand in hand with Bryn, happily went outside. Hannah, who was adjusting Dale's dress, remarked, "Young Master Theodore is so lively. I recall young Master Zygmunt being quite quiet." Dale's heart skipped a beat. Realizing her slip, Hannah immediately fell silent. Dale, however, was filled with anxiety. One day, she would have to tell Hannah the truth. After all, once they lived together, Theodore's secret couldn't be kept hidden from her. Dale surveyed the clothes laid out in her room. everything she planned to wear to the ball. She stretched, sighing with relief that she had finally finished preparing. Just then, she remembered Theodore, who had gone to play in the courtyard. He still hadn't returned. Hannah, who was putting away the clothes, offered to send someone to fetch him. Suddenly, the maid who had accompanied Theodore outside burst through the door, breathless. She flung herself at Dale's feet, crying, "Miss, I'm so sorry. Master Theodore is gone." This happened while Dale was trying on her ball gown. Another maid rushed in, panicked, reporting that the first maid, who had been with Theodore, was also missing. The news struck Dale like a thunderbolt. Dale jumped up, demanding, "What did you say? How could she disappear?" The maid on the floor sobbed, explaining that someone had called to her, and she'd left Theodore for just a moment. When she returned, both Theodore and the other maid were gone. Hannah sensed something was amiss. "Who called the maid away?" she asked. The maid insisted she didn't know. She had run towards a voice, but found no one there. Hannah wanted to search herself, but the frantic Dale insisted on going too. Before leaving, Dale instructed the maid to inform the others and organize a search party. Dale and Hannah turned the courtyard upside down, calling out, "Theodore, where are you?" This was the second time Theodore had vanished. And according to the maid's account, this disappearance was strange. It was as if Theodore had been deliberately taken. A chilling thought crossed Dale's mind. What if someone had discovered his true identity? Just as fear began to consume Dale, a commotion erupted near the gazebo. Servants were gathered there, whispering amongst themselves. Hannah suggested they investigate. Frowning, Dale agreed. When they reached the gazebo, the servants reported that the porcelain inside had been broken. Dale recalled her previous visit to the gazebo with the Emperor, when Theodore had been captivated by the porcelain through the window. What a strange coincidence. Could this incident be related to Theodore? Dale opened the gazebo door and examined the shattered pieces. She questioned the servants. "Has anyone seen a dark-haired boy, about 5 years old? His name is Theodore." The servants were silent for a moment, then shook their heads. Finally, one maid raised her hand. "Miss," she began. "I saw him," she said. Dale eagerly asked, "Where did you see Theodore?" The maid stepped forward. "In this courtyard," she replied. "I saw the young master you described knock over the porcelain." Theodore had mysteriously disappeared, and Dale had frantically searched the entire courtyard. Now, a strange maid who had been cleaning the gazebo claimed to have witnessed Theodore knocking over the priceless porcelain. The maid continued, her voice trembling. The young master was startled when he saw the broken porcelain and ran away. Dale couldn't believe Theodore would do such a thing. She lifted her skirt and stepped closer. "Was he hurt?" she asked. "Did you see how he knocked it over?" The maid, clearly unprepared for such detailed questioning, stammered that she hadn't seen clearly. Dale's expression hardened. "These are the former emperor's treasures," she said sternly. "Not only did you let a child wander in here unattended, but you failed to supervise him." The maid, terrified by Dale's accusatory tone, hastily explained that she had only opened the door briefly to clean and hadn't expected this to happen. The maid apologized profusely. Dale exchanged a look with Hannah. Both felt something was wrong. The whole situation was too suspicious. But they still didn't know where Theodore was, and they couldn't act rashly. Regarding the broken porcelain, Dale told the maids to wait until Theodore was found before dealing with the matter. She needed to hear Theodore's side of the story. She added that any help in finding the child would be greatly appreciated. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind her. Dale turned in surprise to see Theodore safe and sound in the Emperor's arms. The Emperor was puzzled. Why were they all gathered at the gazebo? And what had happened to the porcelain? Dale explained everything that had transpired. When he heard the maid accuse him of breaking the porcelain, little Theodore protested loudly, "I didn't do it." The Emperor questioned Hannah, the maid, demanding to know precisely when she had seen Theodore. Hannah, casting a nervous glance at the Emperor, stammered that she couldn't recall the exact time. This vague response ignited the Emperor's anger. Under his sharp, scrutinizing gaze, Hannah bowed lower, murmuring that it had been perhaps an hour earlier. The Emperor found this even more perplexing. An hour ago, Theodore had been playing in the gardens, far from the gazebo, and in the Emperor's own company. How could he have broken the porcelain there? Dale, her eyelashes fluttering with concern, asked her precious son, "Is that true, Theodore?" Theodore, his small arms waving excitedly, exclaimed, "Yes, Your Majesty saved me." Seeing her lie unraveling, the maid trembled with fear. The Emperor, drawing Theodore close, gently requested, "Theodore, will you tell your Aunt Dale everything that happened, just as you told me?" Theodore, it seemed, had been the victim victim of a mysterious plot. After bidding his mother farewell, he had been playing ball in the courtyard with a young lady-in-waiting. A short while later, Theodore realized the lady-in-waiting had vanished, leaving him alone with his dog, Bling. He turned to the little dog, puzzled, and asked, "Where did the nice lady go, Bling?" Bling could only shake his head, licking Theodore's cheek reassuringly. Just then, an unfamiliar redhead lady-in-waiting approached Theodore. The woman smiled and told Theodore that Miss Dale had sent her to fetch him, promising delicious treats. At the mention of treats, Theodore, ever the sweet-toothed child, eagerly rose to follow her. Suddenly, Bling, who moments before had been docile, began to growl menacingly at the woman, his brow furrowed in suspicion. Jolted by Bling's warning, Theodore paused. He didn't recognize this woman at all. His mother had repeatedly warned him about strangers, urging him never to go with anyone he didn't know. He told the woman plainly, "My aunt said I can't go with strangers." The redhead, flustered, waved her hands dismissively. "But I'm not a bad person," she insisted. Seeing the woman persist, Bling barked fiercely, his jaws wide. Theodore had never seen his dog so aggressive. The redhead, sensing the situation turning against her, lunged forward, attempting to grab Theodore's collar and drag him away. In a flash, Bling sank his teeth into the woman's wrist. The woman recoiled in pain, and Theodore seized the opportunity to flee in the opposite direction, Bling close at his heels. Tears streaming down his face, Theodore ran blindly. The courtyard was vast, and he had no idea where he was going. Lost and afraid, he followed Bling, who seemed to know exactly where they were headed. Trusting Bling implicitly, Theodore followed the dog through a dense thicket of trees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. All he could think of was getting back to his mother. To Theodore's surprise, Bling, guided by some uncanny instinct, led him straight to the Emperor. The Emperor, seeing Theodore's tear-streaked face, was startled. Theodore, sobbing, clung to the Emperor's leg. "Your Majesty," he cried, "a stranger tried to take me." The Emperor, realizing something was amiss, knelt down and gently soothed the frightened child, urging him to recount everything that had happened.